Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting for the fiscal year 2019 preliminary proposed budget for Thursday, October 25th, 2018. And may I please have a roll call?
Commissioners Myers. Brodsky.
Here.
Brockman.
Here.
DePorcito. Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Carswell.
Here.
Spelman. Spady.
Here.
Gillespie.
Here.
Capone.
Here.
Gomez. Klein. Lucar.
Here. At this time, would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get started, I'll just make a couple brief comments. First, questions and answers, Q&A by commissioners only will be allowed at the conclusion of each presenter's presentation. Comments by the public will be at the conclusion of all the presenters on the agenda. So with that, we will now call on Township Manager Richard Manfredi for the proposed budget presentation. And again, this is a preliminary presentation budget. Thank you, sir. It's yours.
Thank you, President Luker. Board members, before we begin, just a few acknowledgments. Number one, I want to recognize Mr. Barron, Finance Director. I want to recognize Ms. Herman, Assistant Finance Director. Ms. Waymeyer, Assistant Township Manager. Ms. Knuckles, Communications Manager. And I'd also like to acknowledge Ms. Castorino, who works in my office, for the endless hours that they've put in putting this together. But you know, that's the immediate team. There's also a lot of people every day. The budget process is not start in May or October or November. There's a lot of people all year long who work to save money. There are a lot of people on the front lines who aren't directors or managers or are here this evening that I think need to be recognized. There are people like Craig Thane, Kenny Lynch, Bill Griffenberg, the kind of people who...
Excuse me, could you check to make sure your microphone is on?
It is. It's me.
Okay.
I'm too far away.
Thank you.
So those are the people, the Craig Thanes, the Kenny Lynches, the Bill Griffenbergs, who are out there every day working to save us money every day, that allow us to save money every day and not have to raise taxes and not have to do things, who are willing to, do what's necessary for the team and the township in their roles. So we recognize management, we recognize directors, but we don't recognize those on the ground who are actually doing a lot of the work and saving us the money. So I wanted to make sure that we recognize them. You're going to hear from some directors and managers this evening who have great detail, and we'll get into that. But I just thought it was important that we understand that it's an everyday, 365-day-a-year process, this budget, and there are a lot of people who work hard to get us there and get us here this evening so that we can present what we have to you. As you know, the mission remains to serve the property owners, taxpayers, ratepayers, and all who visit Abington Township in a professional and respectful manner while delivering cost-effective and efficient services. It's at the core and essential of all that we do. And as I go through this preliminary proposed budget, I will talk about that. And again, just some housekeeping items. We have this evening's presentation of the 2019 preliminary proposed budget. This, depending upon the outcome of tonight, would be considered for adoption as a proposed budget, which would get released to the public shortly after, if adopted on November 8th, for a 20-day period, and then final adoption on December 13th. Again, I've read the mission to you. You see the mission, and it's at the core and at the heart of what we do. But at the center of all, in the hierarchical structure of all that we do, is the electorate, the citizens of Abington Township, that drives what we are about and what we are to do. Of course, they elect their Board of Commissioners, and the Board of Commissioners appoints the professionals to make sure we achieve your goals and objectives. I mention that because as we go through this, the goals and objectives of the board and the priorities are what really made what we're trying to do here the most important thing. I think that if we focus on your priorities, which were a parks and feasibility plan, long-term, focus on traffic safety, which we have traffic safety people every day who are working hard, the Chris Posies, the Al Freeds, and everyone above and below. And then, of course, the third was stormwater management. Those three priorities, and so as everyone knows, this process started in May. So while we work every day all year long in the budget process and to execute the budget and your goals and priorities, the process started with goal setting and you determining what your priorities were going to be for 2019. This budget reflects in every way those priorities. Again, the priorities are a parks and facilities plan that looks forward, that's inclusive of all people, that we make sure that we do it the right way, to do a proper study. There is $125,000 appropriated in the capital for that. The second thing is traffic safety. The traffic safety team has looked at certain things, and that, you know, while that wasn't a large sum of money, it was an important sum of money, $67,500. The ask was $133,000, but we're able to reduce that to $67,500 because of the things that they do every day. And then the third priority was the stormwater management. Stormwater management, and as Commissioner Spiegelman and President Luker and I and a few others last evening found firsthand, is a high priority. We don't have to tell any of you how important stormwater is and the complaints and the concerns people have, and you identify that as priority 3, not in terms of only being number 3, but as making it to the top 3. And then shortly behind that was a pavement management plan. The township has been blessed by being able to develop a plan. Well, Mr. Micolo, who is still, by the way, with us in part-time capacity, Mr. Pontelandolfo, who is the current director, and Mr. Clark of working with Aqua and Pico, so that we can be paving a lot more roads and a lot more miles of roads than we ever would have. But that's going to dry up someday. So while it is a fourth recognized priority, it is not a priority in funding for this year, but the future. But I mention it now because these decisions and the things that I'm recommending in this budget also look forward into the future. So without getting into too much of that now philosophically, let's just touch on some things that I know that are important to you and to the taxpayers. Number one, the tax revenues. As you all know, the value of a mill, there's a calculation to that. Mr. Barron and I have two different methodologies to try to get to the same point to make sure that they are fairly represented and accurate, and I think, once again, we've achieved that. Two things I want to mention about this, and you notice that the highlighted is the value of 1 mil and then what 1 mil actually brings in. But in the far right-hand column, the variance, just want to note that for the first time in a long time, the total assessed value of all the land in the township went down. And it's a cyclical thing. There are appeals that are made, property owners who feel their properties are valued too high, they'll appeal it. That has an effect. Businesses close, that has an effect. So what that means in the translation is that you could see in the bottom line number on this chart, tax revenues, 15 million and 14 million are still high. But when you look at each one, you can see that it went down slightly because we're not taking in the same amount of money for every mill of tax. Now, it's slight, but it's just noteworthy. As you've read in what I've presented to you this evening, there's good news. The good news is there's no recommendation or need for a tax increase to the general fund, no additional rate increases proposed or recommended for sewer, refuse, and again, we were doing things all year long to make sure that we don't even need to take advantage of the dollars that are available to us in the fund balance so that, you know, this year there's $478,000 that we could use to balance the budget. We're not using all of that. We're only using 200 and some thousand. So that is a good sign that we're being good stewards with the money and doing things in your policy on fund balance, which was reviewed again a few months ago, is a sound one. So what does that mean to the property owner? We've identified the average value, and again, of that total assessed value for a typical property owner is at $150,000. So if that's set at that, then 1 mil of taxes would equal $150. So at the present tax rate that's proposed, at 4.43, which is higher than, so it's not present, but it's proposed to be present, that would increase, and what the taxpayer, the average taxpayer would pay would be $666.45, which is $36 more than they're paying this year. The chart shows the increase broken down for fire and ambulance. So I think it's important to note, no tax increase for general purposes. The only tax increase that I'm recommending is to support the tremendous fire companies that we have in the fire department that we have. And when you see the presentation by Mr. Schramm, and when you hear what he has to say, and Mr. Rohr, the fire marshal, you'll understand why I stand here and recommend that their portion of a $30 increase in the tax bill to the average homeowner, it will be money well spent, not only for the fire companies, for the support that they need for everything that they've done through their strategic plan and they do every day. You know, we all know what they all do, and we all know when that siren or that catastrophe goes off, how important they are, and we sometimes forget that when all's smooth and smooth sailing. The ambulance tax is also being recommended for a slight increase, and that is at 0.04, the rate that would take it to 0.05. We currently bring in approximately $35,000, and that's what we give to second alarmers. This would increase it by a little more than 150-some thousand to 180-some thousand. We have Kim Davidson with us this evening, who is with second alarmers, whose knowledge and, you know, we have had many, many meetings, as has Mr. Schramm and I, dating back months to review all of these proposals. And his presentation will outline why we are recommending some increase. You will see that the request was for a $400,000 increase, but we're only recommending the 150, and you'll see why, and he understands why, because we have to recognize that we can't just constantly increase taxes or raise them. So we're trying to do this as smartly as possible, and I'll talk about that a little bit in generalities before they speak. So I mentioned the priorities: to develop a comprehensive capital parks and recreation facilities plan, including establishing inclusive facilities and related programs. There's $125,000 budgeted for this. But it's important to note that this is only the study. So in 2019, we spend that money, and that money is appropriated for spending, again, without any tax increase to pay for it. But the most important thing is, what do we do once that study comes back? We already saw that there were 2 pools recommended at $3 million apiece. You'll also notice that there were $330,000 of requests for improvements into the parks for this year that I'm recommending we suspend, because it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend money in parks that are going to be studied that, frankly, we may end up wanting to do something different with. So in meeting with Director Rolls and going through all of this, and Director Barron, you know, the recommendation here is that we suspend those, do the study, understand what makes sense, see what the professionals say, and then you can make a better decision going forward as to how you want to spend that money and what you want to do. And again, I'll touch on why that's important later. To develop a comprehensive traffic safety program. This is probably a high priority and a top priority, but this is probably the easiest one to accomplish because of the tremendous people we have in traffic safety who are doing a lot of this every day. But there's also policy decisions that have to be made. Some of the contentious thoughts were with respect to speed tables. Some call them speed tables, speed humps. We won't go down that road, but in any event, there are certain things that can be done to assist in traffic safety. It's a priority. They've already started working on that. And Mr. Porter, who will be talking primarily about the body cameras, will also be here, and Chief Malloy, to address that if you have any questions. And then finally, the comprehensive township-wide stormwater master plan. Again, any one of you can talk more to this and the need than I can. But in order to be able to do all 3 of these, especially priority 1 and priority 3, we have to be forward-looking. We have to think about how are we going to pay for this in the future. And the only way to think about the future is to think about today. And if we're not looking at taking care of those who have already taken the necessary steps to strategically plan for their future, and I'm referring to the fire companies, if we don't dedicate that funding now, it's going to, in the future, take away dollars to create maybe 2020, 21, and 22, these priorities. So that's at the core of why we're recommending this dedicated fire tax, to make sure that the fire companies, the firefighters, have a dedicated stream, that they can move forward with their strategic plan, and that they can do what they need to do and won't be neglected 2 years from now when we're looking for money for parks and pools and stormwater and pavement and all of that. So that's at the core, and I can't say it enough, it is dedicated funding for the fire companies. Where does your property tax dollar go? So we could say who has your property tax dollar, could say many things, but as everyone knows, the Abington School District, part of the tax bill is $79.3, or I'm sorry, percent. Abington Township non-fire, and I break that out because there's fire and non-fire, is 8.8%. With this tax increase, they would only be getting a 2.3% share of the total tax bill that everyone receives. Montgomery County is 8.6%, and then Montgomery County has a separate tax on the tax bill, as everyone knows. That's 1% for Montgomery County Community College. So you could see of the pie, of the tax dollar, where the monies are. So how are property tax and other dollars spent? And I would encourage anyone other than commissioners, because I know you read this, but to look at the narrative, the budget narrative that accompanies this, the budget message that talks about, I think people will be surprised to learn what every department does and how well they do it and how focused they are on achieving and where the tax dollar actually goes. We break things down into major cost centers. Those major cost centers are the general fund, and the general fund is the largest fund that we have. It handles all operations, non-capital, sewer operations, highway aid, which is that liquid fuels tax that you pay when you go to the pumps, which is primarily for all of the road work, refuse, which we know, and again, no proposed increase in refuse fees, and permanent improvement, which is the capital fund. So this chart is for the general fund, and this is really for illustrative purposes to show how the fund balance policy works in practicality. So operating revenues, the revenue recapitulation for 2019 shows $40 million, $922,671. We see operating expenditures in the general fund at $41,193,688. That non-operating revenues of $271,017 is what balances the budget. So the non-operating revenues plus the revenues balances the budget. That $271,000 is the amount of money that we are able to take of the $478,815 that the fund balance policy allows. And the calculations there then show you that total revenues, all sources, $55,809, total operating and non-operating, $45,975. That gives us a net fund surplus of $9.8 million. That net fund surplus of $9.8 million is the amount of money the fund balance policy requires to be set aside for 3 months of expenses. So this is the chart that explains how that works, how this fits into our general fund operating, and tries to make it very clear as to how this is and why we're only using 271 of that 478. Fire Marshal Rohrer and I were talking in the morning, and I mentioned Bill Griffenberg, and I realize I'm going over my time, Mr. President, that I told you today, but I think it's important to understand that for example, in the fire marshal's office, the decisions that this board made in the recommendations that we've come will saved $85,000 alone in the fire marshal's office. That even adding back, there's only one position that's being added back to the budget, and that's where we had an assistant fire marshal. We took a break. We eliminated that position to evaluate whether or not it made sense to have an assistant fire marshal or fire inspectors. That evaluation went on all year. The determination by Mr. Rohrer was, with my full support, to go to a full-time fire inspector. That'll get that'll improve life safety, increase inspections, and help us also generate income to offset future costs. Mr. Griffenberg, I mentioned him because, you know, we also look for opportunities throughout the course of the year, and we saw an opportunity to reduce costs by taking talent from one location and moving it to another location, which allowed us to free up benefit dollars. So those benefit dollars are going to help fund this fire inspector. And we have another talent being used at the library, which also saves us money. So I'm just mentioning these things so you can see why we're only going 271 of the 478,000 that we're able to use out of the fund balance policy. So the summary of operating and capital funds is fairly straightforward. These are the appropriations for the operating funds totaling $60,844,594. General making $41,193,688, and I won't insult everyone's intelligence and those who can read by looking at this, but I think it's very important to note that operating is at 60 and that all of the capital brings us to a total of 64 and only 334.43 is for all capital. And that's including the 661,000 that we're asking for to fund what the fire company wants to do. And before I turn this over to Mr. Barron, I just want to talk about the monies that are being requested in this because obviously I'm recommending a tax increases. I think it's important for everyone to understand, and I won't get into all of the details, but there's one point I want to drive home. In that request of that's more than $660,000 is specifically $300,000 per year for the long-term capital planning for all 5 fire stations. You know, Dave, I think it's safe to say you and I had some healthy conversations throughout the budget cycle about how he arrived at that number and what that meant, and how the fire companies were really looking towards $60,000 per year of that $300,000 for it to be split that way so that they can make improvements in their facilities right out of the gate. And I said, I think the first thing we need to do is actually conduct a facility feasibility analysis, looking at all 5 fire stations to make sure that what's the optimum operation out of that building. And that of that 300,000, of that 60,000 per company, we need to appropriate at least 25,000 for this, to fund this feasibility study, which would leave $35,000 per station to make the improvements they want. And you'll see what they're proposing. And I don't believe it'll set them back much. The original request for $60,000 per station was a cap on what we had to give them because, this is where Mr. Schramm and I have had some fun discussions about the estimates and the numbers. But the point is that I think what they're asking for is reasonable. I think, you know, their willingness to look at, maybe less than that so that we can make sure how we spend money. You know, I've had numerous conversations with Chief Jones about how they can't get their fire apparatus into the building because they have to keep digging lower and lower to back into the station right behind President Luker and all of you. So there are a lot of things that have to be looked at in terms of how are we going to best support this incredibly proficient fire company. With that said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Barron to go into a greater revenue and expense review.
Okay, before we start with Mr. Barron, can I ask any commissioners who have any questions of Township Manager Richard Manfredi first? Commissioner Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Mr. Manfredi. That was well done there. I think I mention this every year, but on this, can we jump back to that schedule for the 2019 general fund? Your table with the blue. And this may appear somewhere, but I just...
The blue table, you said?
Yeah, I think it's page 2, or it's page 2 in your narrative, but I'm not sure where it is in your presentation.
It's further back.
There you go. Thank you. Just want to be clear that that net fund surplus that we have at the bottom, I mean, we have internal restrictions on that number.
That is correct.
Right, and I just want to make that point to the public, so we're not, recommending a tax increase with the $10 million standing, sitting there that would be available for use. And even if it were, that would be illusory because we could put that right into post-retirement benefit obligations or funding pensions or even into, unfunded capital projects. But I just didn't want to give the impression, I'm not suggesting you were stating that, but that there was $10 million on hand.
You are absolutely correct.
And we restrict that, some of that is for operating expense and beyond.
That 9.8 million will not be touched,
Right.
period. And when you say restricted, it is fully restricted
Great,
to not be used.
thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Vice President Klein.
Can you talk as to what happened with the goal of trying to implement GIS mapping for the township? Because I think we talk about all these studies that we're going to have done with parks and stormwater, and we've had several other studies already done, and there's really my concern is that there's no place in the township where all of that stuff overlaps and everybody understands what everything else is going on. And I think whereas it's more of a technical and in the weeds kind of thing that organizes the township, I think it's more important to get that done instead of moving forward and having all these studies done where we can't overlap that information. And I think that was one of the things that I was looking forward to in this budget.
And I'm disappointed that I couldn't include it, but frankly, trying to make sure that we have enough monies I didn't want to increase the expenditures any further. When we went through the goal-setting session, it was discussed as a priority and didn't make it high enough into the priorities. So with that and with the fact that, frankly, I didn't want to add the money. It's that simple. There's no question that it's a top priority. If the board wants to consider looking at that, I am more than happy to take a further look between now and November 8 and come back with a number even before then to say what we should include. But I'm just concerned about the amount of dollars it's going to take in order to spend on the capital plan and on the for stormwater and for parks. But there's no question, you're right. GIS, and you and I both saw the presentation, what it can do, the benefits of it, and the dollars you can save by doing it are tremendous. But I think
With a township of this size and sophistication and amount of things that we have going on in this township, and not to have that kind of information at our fingertips is, to me, is problematic, especially when we start to keep adding overriding ideas of parks and rec and stormwater management and traffic safety and paving and all of that stuff. When we start to talk about all that stuff has budget implications, and without having a clearinghouse of that information being in one location, I think of a township like this is just, I think we fall short. And, I'm sorry we didn't do it sooner, but now it's on at least my radar, and I think it's a mistake. And I would have liked to have seen a recommendation that would have kept that in the budget and maybe have foregone some other things, knowing that that is the linchpin to trying to understand all of the things that are proposed and going on in the township from now and until whenever it can always be added to. And not only that, it becomes a tool that we can reach out to the residents of the township, and they can see some of these things on, I don't want to say real time, but on a day-to-day basis of what's going on in the township.
if the other members don't object, I'd be more than happy to refine our research, because we can get these numbers rather quickly. And I could, when we present this on November 8th, I can have that number, because that will be the night that you would finally decide what the proposed budget is and say what would be the impact of adding this back in. And if there are additional places we can look to see if we can help offset that cost, I'm happy to do that and bring that back with us on the 8th, unless there's objections from other members.
Well, I, for one, would love to see the numbers and understand the magnitude and even have a brief understanding for the rest of the board as to what a GIS system and producing that information in GIS would bring to the township. But I think
If there's no
I think it's a
objections, I'll have
mistake
that
not to have it
information.
as part of the budget, so.
Okay.
On the heels of that question, Mr. Manfredi, what is the approximate cost of what Vice President Klein is asking for?
The initial costs can be as low as $50,000. It could be as much as $250,000, depending upon how you approach it and what you include in it initially. And then there are the infrastructure costs. Now, we have people in our building that we can redeploy to keep our costs down over time. But it would have an impact as you grow this, so would staff. But how can we manage that over time? And I just wasn't prepared to give you a sound enough, thorough enough recommendation to include this. But I can certainly take a look at some rough numbers to get it off the ground and bring them back on the 8th. And it seems like no one has an objection to at least looking at those
Right,
numbers.
and just to give an analogy, I mean, this is the difference of taking, all the information that has to be manually integrated and discussed among departments in this more of a, and I don't mean to say that the township is in this position, but in these kind of medieval, silos of information and integrating it and having it at the fingertips of anybody in the township so that everybody knows what is going on in all facets of the township. And, to not have this started, once again, I mean, I've been on the board for 10, 11 years, so I'm just as part of this that I would like to have seen it started earlier, but now having gone through some of the information gathering, I just think it's something that we should absolutely be considering, and considering sooner than later.
And I'll bring it
Because
back.
if we put it off now, we're going to find another reason to put it off next year.
I understand, and I'll have that information for the 8th.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Barron, you're next.
Why aren't residents allowed to speak?
You weren't here, I don't believe, when I mentioned it. Residents will be allowed to speak after all the presenters have made their presentations.
Our questions could be answered if we were allowed to put them forth in the...
Again, an announcement was made at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to follow the format that was announced. Thank you. Mr. Barron, please,
Our interests.
please, an announcement was made. We're going to follow that procedure. Thank you. Mr. Barron, you're next.
Good evening, Commissioners. First of all, I'd like to reiterate what Manager Manfredi said, that this is not just himself and me and my staff, his staff, department heads, it's all the employees throughout this township that make this budget a whole. The gentleman doing the streets, paving, the gentleman picking up the trash, our police officers that are out there every day. Again, I just want to reiterate what Manager Manfredi said, the same thing. So what I'm going to go over is this is the general fund revenues. And if you look at the pie chart, you can see that the earned income tax, the business tax, and real estate, them three make up 69% of our revenue. Many years ago, for the people that were on the board, we did not have the earned income tax. I think 2003, we put that in. You can see that's $8 million we get in the earned income tax at this time. So just something to point out. I'm not going to read them all. You can see the different breakouts of the revenues that we bring in through the township to balance the budget of $41 million. These are some of the things that have increased from last year's budget. The real estate taxes, 214, fire to 670. That has the fire tax increase in it, and it has the ambulance tax in it, okay? So you don't say, is there more money on top of that? That is already in them numbers. The earned income tax, based on the history of what I saw has been collected, I was able to increase that $100,000. The transfer, again, based on the houses are selling in this area, we can bring that budget up. Again, these are things based on you see, and things change, these all change. So I'm just, business privilege tax, based on the budget of last year, on what we've collected so far this year, I can bump that up $150,000. Same thing with the local service tax. More people, as we know, unemployment is down, more people are working. If People were paying the local service tax. And building permits. Last year, we took the building permits back down because the year before that, we were really low. Building permits this year have been above the budget and doing very well. So we raised that back up to 100,000. And the state pension, that is based on the MMO, which we passed last month, the minimum municipal obligation. So that's based on what state aid we get, employees' contribution, revenues matches the expense. That just increases that. Here are the expenses for the general fund. As you can see, 41 million. Again, police are 50% of our budget. Public Works, 10.9. Parks, 10.6. They're the biggest three departments, and they're out there doing things on the road, parks, and our police officers who are patrolling the streets and keeping our residents safe every day. I'm not going to read the rest. You can see the different percentages per the departments. It just helps us out to see where the money is going. Again, here what I did was I broke out some of the increases from the 2018 budget to 2019 budget. CBA, just for everyone, that's a collective bargaining agreement. The police officers and the per diem union have an agreement, the union contract, that runs through next year. So their wages are already built in that we have to give them, and that's the price that we pay here, the police salary and wages. The non-CBAs, the salary wages are all non-union people, 129,000. Part-time wages, we've gone through the budget, and over the years, we've lowered the part-time wages, and this year it got to be a slim. So we've looked at some of the areas and through the departments, and we bumped some of the part-time wages up. Medical benefits, it's a $146,000 increase for all employees in the general fund. This is probably the lowest increase that I can remember the last couple of years. We got a very good rate. I'm not saying the rate, but we got a very good rate of renewal for next year, and that helped us bring the number down. When we started this budget back in August to putting stuff together, I know we're using $271,000 of fund balance. We were way, way above that, and I did not think we would ever come close to where we are in the budget we sent to you last week and the budget we're presenting tonight. Everything else you can read. Gasoline, we all know, gasoline's going up. Now it's starting to come back down. When we did this budget in August, we got to assume the amount that is out there now. We can't think it's going to go back down. If it does, it'll be a savings. We have to assume that the price is going to stay up and budget that. Equipment, you see purchases. Some of that is the cars we were buying was moved over to capital instead of the operating. So it kind of shows a decrease. Longevity, we've had a lot of retirees this year of senior employees. So our longevity to the employees have gone down from the future. Bond debt, our bond is going down. I think I show that later. But our bond after this year is down to $13 million total in sewer and general fund that's out there. That is, we are in excellent shape for that for the future. So that is the general fund. The refuse fund, as you can see, 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19, the residents are paying the same rate for the disposal of trash. That is amazing. If you go look at the price of our tipping fees have gone up, our employees' wages have gone up, our benefits have gone up, but we have been able to keep this stable due to some grants that are out there and just managing it to the best ability. The sewer budget. In 2017, as you see, we raised a little bit, a 3.89% increase. 17, 18, and 19 have been the same. We're not offering an increase at this year. We're not asking for an increase in sewer for 19. Capital fund review. I'm just going to go over some things on the capital. This just goes over the cash balance in the capital. As you can see, to start the year, we had $7.8 million in capital. We had $7.7 million in expenses out there to be worked on. Okay. 2018 revenue was $727,000, and the transfer that we're going to transfer from the fund balance is 2.6. So that leaves us with $3.3 million in the capital fund. We're looking for funding of $2.3 million, but $600,000 of that would be covered under the fire tax. So we're only funding 1.7. I think Manager Manfredi spoke about that earlier. If we approved everything that everybody asked for, that number would be 0. And we can't do that. That money was put there to fund 3, 4, 5 years in the future, not to be spent all in 1 year. So that's why we've sat down and we recommend what we're recommending to be approved, the capital budget. These are just some of the histories of the permanent improvement budget. I'm sorry. This is revenue source, I'm sorry. So the permanent improvement revenue source, we'll be using $1.2 million in fund balance, $663,000 from the fire tax, $505,000 from the payment in lieu of, which we also refer to as the pilot program, and then reallocations of projects. Right now, when we ask the departments of projects that were out there that were finished, what money would they be turning in? It's hard to do in August because projects are still going. We'll re-ask them again in November and December, and in January and it rolls, what can I close out and not bring forward? That helps us fund some of that. So that's where we come up with the $2.3 million to fund the capital. Here are the budgets, just in histories for administration, technology, economic development, police, public works. You can see the different budgets. We took some of the economic development money and moved it to administration and into public works. The business district areas are moving to public works because currently, right now, Angelo Pantalondolfo and myself oversee that, make sure things are being done in them areas, so that moved it under public works. And that's, I made up the time for Mr. Manfredi. Told me quick and get out of here now.
Thank you, Mr. Kevin Barron. Are there any comments or questions of Mr. Barron from commissioners? Commissioner Myers.
Thank you. Kevin, can you go back to the screen that had the DEA, I think it's the one before that, the DEA funds? We have not regularly seen money come in, but there has been at times money come in. Do we anticipate anything next year from that?
That is a very good question. For years, we didn't get money, then we got a lump sum. If anybody doesn't understand the DEA program, there's funds that are out there because our police officers are involved in the DEA search, seizure, or whatever, but it takes forever to get that money. Chief Malloy was just sent a letter saying that the money's coming. I think Chief Livingood was sent that same letter last year. Chief Kelly was sent a letter year before that. So we don't count on that. If that does come in, they will get the money that's entitled to it, but, so that's why we're leaving it at 0. But I think the last year, we assessed some DEA money was tabby 15 or 16. And then it's tagged for police business only. So, but we do a report with the DEA every year.
When it comes in, it can be a large amount.
Correct. We're looking for approximately $250,000 to be coming in this year. Unfortunately, I'll believe it when I see it. When it hits our bank account, that's when I'll tell you we got it. We could raise that revenue next year to DEA. We put it in this year's budget. That's how kind of we balanced this year's budget because we put $250,000 because we were told by DEA we were getting that in 2018. We're now at the end of October and we have not got that money yet. So
I certainly understand you're not putting it in until you have it because it's never a certainty. Right. But sometimes you have an idea that it's coming.
yeah, so part of the budget that we do, whatever we budget in the DEA expense side, we put on the DEA revenue side. So that is, if it's a $100,000 budget expense, we put $100,000 in revenue. So if we go above that, that's when the police get additional money in capital to fund, maybe buy a car, undercover car, or radios or whatever is needed. So.
Any other questions, Vice President Klein?
Following up on that, and I do have other questions, do we have a cash flow numbers on the DEA since we started the program as to how much it has cost the township, the revenue and expenses on the DEA position?
Yes, but I do not have it with me.
Okay, is that something you can provide to us before the November
Absolutely.
meeting? Thank you. The debt service, am I reading this correctly, that in the general fund, we'll be finished with our debt service in '23? With
Yes, sir.
no additional debt being taken on between now and then?
Not at this time.
And then the other two funds, the sewer 22 and the refuse 23, again?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay.
So that 2023, if we do not borrow any more money, we will be totally out of debt.
And the funding, currently in our general fund, we have no we have no allocated funding stream for capital, for permanent improvement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that number that we talked about, that was at 3.3 million, and we're taking 1.7 out, will leave us, that's the only funding we have right now for permanent improvement.
No, we do get the permanent, the payment in lieu of money.
Right.
But we used to do the payment in lieu of money, and then we used to do from the general fund $500,000.
Right.
Way back, we've stopped that. The only money going into capital is the money that could be over the fund balance maximum. It would get transferred to that, was that 2.6 I said we're transferring, that's the overage from last month, or last year, I'm sorry. And the payment in lieu of. So whenever that money runs out, correct, it will have to be, it would be a
But
big.
once that money runs out, we now have a hole in our budget of funding capital improvements because we no longer have it in our general fund.
Correct. That's why we can't fully fund everything everybody wants.
Right.
Last year we did. It was reasonable. I think we funded 1.7, 1.8. This year we're looking at 1.7 plus this fire tax of 663,000. So
And are you comfortable, maybe this is a question for both you and Mr. Manfredi, are you comfortable that the capital expenditures being suggested are necessary at this time or cannot be?
Yes, we
cannot
spent-
be phased out, cannot be extended out? Because my concern is, you know, the idea of the fund balance policy is not necessarily to always have a surplus. I mean, you know.
correct. We've discussed that in finance.
Right, ideally, it'd be, we end up with a zero, and at some point, that's going to start, there's going to be years where that's going to level out. There's going to be years where we might pick up some funding. So my concern is if we keep whittling away at it at 1.7 at a time, we're going to, next year, we could potentially run out of permanent improvement fund money.
We could, Manager Manfredi and I sat with the department heads, the original capital,
Or 3 million.
$3 million was asked for. We sat down with the departments, said we can't, what can you give back? And we sat with every department and took back what they could wait till next year to get. And then the things that were left in there were things that needed to be done next year, all departments. So we do have a bond money out there that I don't have included in that because we're not drawing it down till we spend it. So there is bond money out there that we haven't drawn down.
What do you mean bond money?
So we borrowed money in 2017 to pay for sewer projects, the Old York Road, Susquehanna Road, and the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, so I'm looking at what we have in the bank and on the accounts right now. That money, we're not using it, I'm not bringing it down, so we're not borrowing it. So
Right.
what I mean by that is I'm not paying interest on money sitting in the bank account for something we're not doing. So we have time to do that. So I didn't include that money in my capital. So there is a little bit of what, and that's why I feel comfortable what we presented to you.
Okay. And when you say sewer money, you're actually talking about stormwater?
Stormwater, yes.
Okay, because the sewer money is
Correct.
allocated towards.
Sewer is a different
I just want to make
fund,
sure
different-
we're
yes.
talking about the same thing.
Storm, sewer.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Manfredi?
Short answer to your question is yes.
I don't remember my question.
Were we
I'm
comfortable?
very comfortable with
Oh.
where we are. It's,
I mean, I would tell you that I think we're getting awfully tight. I think the idea of that reserve and the way the fund balance policy were operated was to continue to feed and have control over the capital expenditures so that we don't deplete that permanent improvement fund because there's always that looming expenditure that, as Kevin talked about, was that we used to have when I first started on the board, we had close to $1 million in the general fund for capital improvements, and now that's down to zero. So once that money's gone, we need to find another funding source.
and Mr. Klein, you're defining in a different way what I was saying earlier when I said if we don't dedicate these dollars now for fire capital improvements, we may not have any left for any of it later. So.
Oh, no, I agree with you there. We're still looking to propose 1.7, which is about a half
Understood.
of what we have in reserve. So that's my point. Another year of 1.7, and next year, if we don't have an allocation from the fund balance policy into the capital improvement, that's gone. And 2020, we're looking at finding funding source in the general fund.
Understood.
So, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? If there are none, thank you, Kevin Barron, for your presentation. Next, we'll have Mr. Dave Schramm.
And Mr. John Rohr, sir. John Rohr is going to join him.
Okay, I'm sorry. Accompanied by John Rohr, our fire marshal.
Thank you. The journey that brings us here tonight began a little over a year ago, October 23rd, 2017, when the Abington Township Fire Department started the process for a community-driven strategic plan. Our values have always been continuous improvement in the services that we provide the citizens of Abington Township. And that's why it was so important to involve the community into our strategic planning process. How did this work? We began with community leaders. There's a photo of some of them. Now, incidentally, our strategic plan, I think you know, is on our website, abingtonfd.org, and the names of all of our external stakeholders are listed there. With the help of a facilitator, we gave them a working lunch, and they developed what the community expects of their fire department. And then from there, the concerns that they had for us, not concerns about us. These are all listed in the strategic plan, and I think you'll find that it's very interesting reading, especially when you come to the part of the positive feedback. All right, so using the external stakeholders, the community leaders, 43 of them, we then got our members involved. Now, the members were known as the internal stakeholders. It's very important in the management of a volunteer fire department to have the members get ownership in the process. We're not paying them, so we have to do it other ways, and I'll get to that in a minute. Having them part of the plan. This was over 4 evenings, and as it turned out, there were 39 of them that got involved from all ranks, all ages, levels of experience, and so forth. A diverse group as we could make it. Plenty of flip charts. Started out with a mission, and then the values, and yes, we do have a vision going forward. And this was all amazingly done by our members. We then did, what is known as the SWOT analysis, and from that, our mission statement. Now, you can read that, but the mission statement is a mission statement. Not all mission statements are mission statements, but this is what we're all about. A dedicated team, volunteer firefighters, and our mission has always been to provide excellent fire rescue, fire prevention, and public education services to the community. This is what our members feel. This is what our members want. Our values: teamwork, competence, respect. This is what was important to the members. The safety of our members. And you'll see this reflected in the strategic plan as I go forward here. And yes, we value the commitment to excellence. As you know, we're an accredited fire department, one of the few all-volunteers organizations that have that distinction, and we're getting ready to undergo the re-accreditation rigmarole back beginning in the first week of November. Our vision. Our vision is to have well-trained firefighters. Sounds simple enough. Provide excellent service and be fiscally responsible. This is important in everything that we did. So you see how the framework kind of fit together here. It was all based on the community expectations. And really that came down to, they want us to show up when they call us. They want us to have sufficient members, sufficient crew numbers to do the job, to know what we're doing when we get there, and to have the equipment necessary to do the job, and to operate in a safe manner. You know, none of this is a mystery. So this is all part of our vision. Now, the next step was to take the community expectations and develop goals and objectives. And what this did was allow us to frame our goals and objectives based on what the community expected. Not just, oh, this is a good idea, not a wish list that the members perhaps wanted, but based on the community expectations. And then we developed timelines and funding estimates. That's also in the strategic plan. Now, the next thing, here again is the external stakeholder, or internal stakeholders, our members hard at work. We needed to develop measurable goals based on community expectations. Not all goals are measurable, and if they're not goals. So what we wanted was a very clear picture of the direction that we wanted the fire department to go in the next 5 years. And again, our view is you get out more than 5 years, in many cases, you're just guessing, but we could argue that, I guess. But the idea is here, our strategic plan is a solid 5-year plan. Measurable goals. So, goals. Now, you all know this. They must be realistic. As I mentioned earlier, they can't be like a wish list. You know, you get into that, and who knows where you wind up. They have to be achievable. Now, think about that for a second. You know, people make a mistake when they do a plan. They come up with 20 goals, 25 goals that are just not achievable. They sound nice, they look nice, but if you can't achieve them, all that's going to happen is your plan's going to go on the shelf, and worse, the members are going to get frustrated. We did all this work, we did all this planning, we followed all these procedures, and it went nowhere. So the goals that we developed have to be achievable, and they are, and affordable. They have to be affordable. So you need those three things. If you don't have those three things, you're just playing, wasting everybody's time. Now, here's the goals. We came up with 6. You know, as I said, we didn't want 20, we didn't want 30. We wanted 6 solid goals based on the expectations of the community. Now, goal 1, this is really the recruitment message. You know, the heart of the volunteer fire department is its members. And we're constantly out there, and you know this, with our website, our Facebook page, and practically every community event that exists, to try to, you know, keep the message that we're a quality organization looking for quality members. And that's really what this is all about. Number 2, and you saw that in the values, and you saw that in the community expectations, this is our firefighter physicals program. You've funded this for 6 years now. And this is to expand it a little bit. All I can tell you about this is that we've done about 900 physicals through the 6 years. Haven't lost a member yet. Some people found things that they didn't know they had and could easily be corrected by, you know, getting their medical attention. So this is one of the things, not being paid, a tremendous value, a tremendous resource, a tremendous program, a tremendous benefit for the volunteers, their families, and the community, and really you, because you want to avoid, you know, a problem. So that's what that one's all about. Number 3 is similar to 1, and this again has to do with our recruitment and retention programs. Now, you know, last month I was here. In the meantime, when all this was going on, as I said, it's been a year putting this together, we received a SAFER grant of $117,500. And that was for basically goal number 3. Now, here we go with this one, which is what we're talking about tonight. Maintain the resources. We've had 12 years of successful audits by an independent auditor with never a negative finding, as the auditors call it. The point is that the firefighters manage their money very well. And you read stories in the paper, it seems like every week, about how that can go south. But haven't had a negative finding. What has happened is the members have tended to defer some of the capital projects that need to be done. There's no other way to say it. Trying to be fiscally responsible, capital projects were deferred. And there's only so long you can do that before you create other problems. So that's what this one is all about. And Manager Manfredi's suggestion earlier about the facilities feasibility study is a wonderful idea. And it fits right into the planning. We want to do things the right way. We want to continue to improve the services and delivery to the community. And this would be just a terrific way to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're fiscally responsible. All this stuff is easy to say. It really is, but I mean it. Under the leadership of Larry Sifkin, our fire training coordinator, we have a wonderful fire training facility over on Fleury Lane. And many of you have been there. We could go on all day about that, and we'd give tours anytime you want. But as the community expects, they want us to know what we're doing when we show up. And we have a culture of training that, in my view, is incomparable to our peers. And it's done through your support through the years with our facility and our programs. And we need to embrace this, maintain it, and continue to support the facilities, the programs, and this all has to do with our mission to provide excellent services. When the members of the Abington Township Fire Department show up at an incident, I'm telling you, they know what they're doing. And I think if you observe them in action, you'll know, what I'm talking about. And this is one that everybody needs to do. And we recognize that includes us. It's a big task. And my responsibility is the fire department support. John and I have no direct authority over them. And we have documents that we recognize need to be updated along the way. Now, we've done the strategic plan. We've done this community risk assessment standard, a cover analysis. And that's on our website as well. That's kind of our operating guideline. And this is something that we recognized and we want to do. Now, some of the ideas in the capital budget proposals and the facilities feasibility study, that's a mouthful saying that. This will give you some idea. From the goals, what happened next was, under the leadership of the fire chiefs, the 5 companies went back and did a needs assessment. That's our way of doing a facility study. And then from the needs assessment, they put their needs, their 5-year needs, 5 projects over the next 5 years, into priority order. Okay. Going back to what I said before when I started, in a volunteer fire department, you have to give the membership ownership. You can't, not do that. So full confidence that the members went back, did their needs assessment, put it in priority order, which I'll show you here in a minute, and determined this $60,000 number felt that this is a reasonable amount, it's an achievable amount. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it would really be a solid start to taking care of some of these projects that have been deferred through the years. Here are some examples. Now, these would all fit very nicely into the feasibility study. Well, there you go. The proposals, with the 5-year plan, it's not one and done. I'd be back every year and we'd talk about next year. So these proposals that we're talking about really are for the first year, 2019. Again, as I told you before, you can't get out there too far with this stuff or you're just going to lose your way and become frustrated and the whole thing will collapse. So, we believe in one step at a time, do something, do it right, move on. So that's kind of what this is all about. Abington Fire Company has determined that the engine room bay doors for many reasons. McKinley, update the electrical system in their firehouse and renovate the original lavatories. I'll get to this in a minute. Weldon Fire Company needs to replace the roofs. No question about it. You can't keep patching because over time, you're going to wind up where you don't want to be. Edge Hill Fire Company renovate the meeting hall and the lavatories, kind of like the same thing. And Roslyn Fire Company, the lavatories. See, that's one of the items that you put off, the lavatories. Now, this is in your budget paper, and this was just a summary of what we talked about. The number there, 1, 2, really 1 and 2 are going to really be dealt with by the SAFER grant. So there's a little benefit there.
Dealt by who?
The SAFER grant. Oh, okay. The $117,500, because that speaks to these really. Maintaining and expanding our membership. Finally, we're asking support of the programs. John and I have worked with Manager Manfredi on what I've said we believe are reasonable, realistic, achievable, and affordable goals for the next 5 years, one at a time. Now, I want to leave you with my final thought here. Money spent on the volunteer fire department, the accredited volunteer fire department, you get a terrific return on the investment. I could talk till sunup about this, but for the money spent to sustain and improve a volunteer fire department, terrific return on the investment, because if you don't do this, then you're going to be dealing with paid staff. Now, how do you do this? And this is where others fail, because they don't have these skills. You have to have competent leadership, and not everybody does. And we do. Through the years, our chiefs, assistants, deputies, so forth, we've all been there, presidents, are competent. They lead their fire companies very, very well, not only on the fire ground, but on the business side of things. You need quality programs for the members, and this would be the firefighter physicals program. It would really be the recruitment and retention programs, because the members are involved with this. Many of you saw our terrific open house programs 2 weeks ago, and incidentally, there's a nice, thanks to Ashley, video on our Facebook page and website of the activities that went along there. But that's an example of the members having ownership in the programs. So you need quality programs, the biggest of which is fire training. And also, you need excellent equipment and facilities. In order to attract quality members, you have to have, I don't know how else to say it, nice stuff. Because you walk into a station and it's like, oh, you're not going to be successful. So that's why I believe that any money spent on sustaining and maintaining the volunteer fire department, based on the strategic plan, looking for a feasibility study, is a terrific return on the investment. So thank you. I'm ready for lots of questions, I guess.
Let me ask you a question. Is Fire Marshal Rohr going to speak on anything? And then I'll hold off and ask questions of the two of you.
I was just allowing Mr. Schramm to make his presentation.
Okay.
Primarily on my side of the budget with my office, which is the request for one full-time personnel.
Excuse me, John, could you make sure your microphone is on?
There we go. Mr. Schramm dealt more so with the chiefs and the fire companies on the capital request. I guess I could lend a little explanation. If you look at the fire marshal's budget, for the last 10 years now, we've appropriated $85,000 for transfer to capital. Fire never actually had a capital budget. So in this year's budget, you will see that $63,000 show up as a transfer from fire marshal to capital. That includes that $85,000 we've had in the previous years that go towards the fire training grounds or radios, and it also included the monies last year for the radio replacement project. The 25-year-old breathing air truck that is housed at Weldon Fire Company, that was proposed to put away money for the last 10 years. That item had been cut. Mr. Schramm operates that apparatus probably more than any one of us, and tell you it is very closely nearing its end use.
26 years old.
Yes. So, I mean, the replacement of that apparatus is a big chunk of this that, you know, we need to look at. So I thank you all for your support, and if you have questions.
All right, I'll open the floor to Commissioner questions. Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dave, this is just a technical point I'm wondering about. For the allocations for the upgrades to the individual buildings,
Yes.
the scope of work is pretty different in some of the buildings. I mean, sometimes there's like, doing multiple bathrooms versus this, versus,
Yes.
things that are going to cost a different amount. I saw that it looked like 60,000 was allocated for each. This is me being inattentive. Is there like a more specific breakdown like of those projects per? I mean, the 60 seems like it's just sort of splitting up the 300.
Thank you for asking that question, because the answer is yes.
Great.
One of the things I wanted to mention, and I guess we don't want to get too deep into this cap business, but the $60,000, again, this was a number that we felt was reasonable and we could get a lot done with it. There's a couple things with that. We believe that knowing what the number is for the next 5 years helped with your budget deliberations instead of peaks and valleys. But also, and this goes to answer your question, Commissioner, the cap is a built-in incentive for the fire companies to manage their money wisely, because anything over the $60,000 would be their responsibility. So it would be a way of getting more value for the dollar. I had them, as a final step, get me a written quote proposal. They're not bidding documents by any stretch of the imagination for the projects that I mentioned earlier during my presentation. And many of them are in phases, phase 1, phase 2, because they're all over $60,000. And some of them are broken down, as I said, into phases. But yeah, I have a written quote, proposal, whatever you want to call it, from each of the stations that support the funding request for the capital budget, and they're all over $60,000. Does that answer your question?
It does, actually. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Commissioner Myers?
Thank you. Fire Marshal, the request for a full-time inspector, approximately how many inspections per year can a full-time inspector do?
Based on our history, what I did as the assistant marshal, and what Jeff Glenn does for us currently today, would be a minimum would be 1,000 inspections. They would be capable of hitting 1,500 inspections themselves. That's 4 days, full-time, on the street, performing inspections. We average between 10 and 15 inspections a day on a full-time day. Okay?
Is that enough to keep up with the demand, what's necessary?
Yes, we have over 2,100 commercial businesses in the township that we go out and inspect, hopefully on an annual basis. The last few years, we haven't been able to hit that 2,000 mark. This would put us over that.
And so you would be able to maintain that annual inspection schedule?
Correct.
Okay.
And one of the other things, just as a side to that, is the fact that we've now upgraded software and coordinating with IT and the administrative staff. We're getting ready to go mobile, paperless inspections. So there's no longer going to be office time. We're going to be on the street, doing our documentation right on tablets, taking the photos, and everything will be paperless, electronic. So looking for efficiencies and save money.
Continuous improvement.
Okay. Any other questions? I do. Vice President Klein.
So you talked about fire inspectors being able to do between 1,000 and 1,500 a year?
That's correct. If they're doing it full-time, 4 days a week, yes.
So that includes the new fire inspector position and also the community service specialist / fire inspector?
And myself, yes.
And yourself. So what's the need for the $10,000 for the part-time?
It's actually broken down into two parts. All right, $7,800 of that part-time hours is dedicated to fire prevention. There are specialists who go visit every one of the elementary schools in the township during the months of April and May. They also do the open houses and special events. There are part-time people we use for that. That leaves my full-time staff out on the street doing inspections.
John, could you speak into the mic? Thank you.
I have 2,200 hours set aside for a part-time inspector that allows me flexibility in scheduling. We do have businesses in the township that operate on a nighttime basis, on weekend basis. We have special events. We have to go do inspections on off hours. So that part-time inspector gives me the flexibility of having somebody trained on the books that can do that. But again, they're limited to stay within that part-time hours that we're budgeted.
So it's $2,200, not 2,200 hours.
2,200 hours.
Right, so that
Excuse me, yes.
$2,200 is actually the inspection aspect of the part-time work, and the 7,800 hours is more dedicated to fire prevention and safety training and awareness.
That's correct. And actually, the inspector budget for that part-time, if you look, equal to 2017 and even 2018. I reduced that by $20,000 to take that contribution into the full-time position.
Okay.
So,
And then I had some questions about about Mr. Schramm's presentation. You had mentioned that the 60,000 was a cap and you thought that was an incentive. My concern is it can potentially be an incentive to actually spend the money. And which is why I agree or would like to get more detail, as Commissioner Spiegelman spoke about, as to how you're going to procure qualified proposals and what information is going to be given to these proposals, how many proposals you're going to be getting for this work. I mean, all this is construction work or somewhat construction work. I'd like to know what those real costs are instead of understanding that we're just allocating $60,000, especially if we haven't done a feasibility study on these facilities, which Mr. Manfredi talked about would be about a $25,000 contribution out of the $60,000. So my real question is, I mean, to me, this sheet that has all $60,000 in here seems to be just not very detailed for, look, I mean, I have no problem I have no problem funding capital improvements. As you said, there's a great value in having a volunteer fire force in the township, so that goes without saying. But at the same time, I want to make sure that whatever's being spent, if we're going to indeed raise the millage for the fire service, I want to know what the costs are, and I think the residents would want to know what those costs are. And they would want to know that the $60,000, if it indeed is a cap, and that these expenditures are over $60,000, I would actually personally like to see what those numbers are and justify, well, but how did you get those numbers? Did you have bid documents go out? Did you have bid specs go out? I mean, how are you controlling the numbers that the taxpayers are going to be paying to these fire companies? Is it, all of that stuff, and all I'm getting is 60,000, 60,000, 60,000, 60,000. I mean, some of these, yes, I can just look at them and say some of them are going to be more. I could look at them and think that some of these are going to be less. But I have no way of knowing that.
Okay.
So my concern with the expenditures, and I don't know how we want to structure this, but I'm a little uncomfortable with just raising the millage to raise $300,000. I know we're raising it for some of these other capital expenditures, but raising the millage for $300,000 and not knowing exactly where those costs are going and what those real costs are. Then, I have one other thing to go on that now. The other expenditures, and I've talked about this in past budgets, we're raising the millage for capital expenditures, which concerns me in the sense that now we're going to find each year $600,000 worth of capital expenditures to fill what this tax increase is going to provide in revenue? Or is there an anticipation that that's going to peel back and be used for operating expenditures for the fire service? Is that question clear?
Absolutely.
It's clear in my head. I'm not sure I'm
I
saying it
understand
clearly.
exactly. I think I may want to jump in on this because
Either one.
Yeah, we've discussed this.
Make
Yeah,
sure your
if-
mic is on.
it is. I just need to move it closer, sir. So when I started my initial introduction and I talked about the numerous healthy conversations Mr. Schramm and I had, and a lot of it centered around what both you and Commissioner Spiegelman just mentioned. And I think it was an approach. And I think the approach that was taken that arrived at the $300,000 can be better stated this way. And I'm the reason you're looking at a list that shows 60, 60, 60, 60, because I asked for justify this, break it down. What are those projects? And then he went back and he asked for that. And they have it, when I say they, the fire company, Mr. Schramm, their approach has been all along, and that's why he keeps mentioning about CAP, we know what we need to do. We did our needs assessment. We know we're going to need at least $60,000 a year, but we know that we have to kick in our own money, so we're only asking for up to $60,000 a year. My response was, I understand that, and I think it makes perfect sense after going through all of the strategic plan that you have a number that you're going to need over the next 5 years. But one of the reasons, to answer your last question first, one of the reasons that I'm recommending this fire tax isn't for capital. It's part of the total. So it's their operating and their capital within one dedicated fire tax for their operations, because as their operational costs rise, it's not that this same dollar will be funding that. So it may be less to capital and more to operations 4 years from now. It may be that what they're projecting as $1.5 million in needs is going to be $5 million in needs, and it's going to have to be broken down in principal and interest. So that was one of the reasons that I was comfortable after the numerous discussions and meetings we had in breaking it out. In fact, looking at the fire marshal's page, I want to make sure everyone understands, the only reason on page 228 that you see the transfer to capital of 663 under fire marshals, because that's always where it was. Mr. Barron and I were just discussing the need to move that over, and again, the complete separation of fire. So I think everything you're looking at, and I just want to say this as well, the process of the capital budget requests and the narratives that you see that are supporting documents in here, those are what came in. It's not necessarily what was approved. And I'll use the traffic safety as an example. Based on what I asked of Manager Freed in the Traffic Safety Division, they came back with a recommendation of $133,000. As you could see in the capital budget, it's $67,500. Because in looking at those numbers and what they were trying to accomplish, there were other ways, such as on the fairway, that can be handled, and that cost got reduced. How can we put in speed tables and do those differently? So the original requests are historical, so you understand the rationale from the beginning, but it's not necessarily the rationale for what is being recommended. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we look at that $300,000 in the way it originally was thought of, it's very confusing. And what I'm trying to do is reshape the thinking that we're talking about up to $35,000 subject to annual review. Let's talk about the mechanics of it. This isn't going to be a check that gets cut and given to the fire companies to be used. These are projects that are going to have to be reviewed and approved and reimbursed to the fire companies. Right. It's not just going to be anything. So it's not a blank check that goes and they can use it however they want.
Right, but not projects. I mean, these projects,
Well, those,
the
what I'm
first on
trying
the
to say
list
is
of each one of the fire companies.
he identified those projects because I asked him to identify projects that would support the funding. They originally didn't do that. It was originally going to be $300,000 for capital improvements. And as a result of asking, well, what did your needs assessment do? What did you come up with? So what I'm trying to say is I'm confident that each fire company has in year one, and that's the important thing, and the other thing you saw up there was annual review. I'm confident that what they've shown will cap at $35,000, that their projects will be $35,000, because as I said, I have $25,000 per company of that 60 earmarked for the feasibility study. And I'm confident that their projects will be at least $35,000. And if they're more, the fire companies are paying that.
I guess I'll leave it as, I understand the request, and I appreciate the request, and I understand the necessities for keeping the fire company, their facilities up to date and in good working condition for efficiency purposes. I'm uncomfortable as it stands right now with the process. I don't like seeing the same number all the way down the sheet. To me, it just seems like an easy way out, and the information isn't clear enough to me to understand the process. I mean, we know I've been on the board long enough that we know if we bond $3 million for stormwater, that we're going to get proposals for engineering. We're going to accept a proposal for engineering. It's going to get done. Then it's going to go out to bid. We're going to see proposals for bidding. I mean, all that stuff is going to be done, and I don't have that comfort level here. I had Mr. Schramm telling me that he's got details. I don't know what those. You have vendor quotes, but I don't know what those vendor quotes are based on, and I'm concerned about the process of expending the money if we're going to vote and raise the fire millage.
Mr. Barron will address that.
Because they're going through our accounting system and our payment of the bills, they have to follow our rules and our regulations to go out to bid, to get prices if it's so much. So we will not reimburse them unless it follows the guidelines that we have as our purchasing procedures or fixing up a building procedures. So I feel very confident that they're not going to get money until they follow the way we do things here. They're going to have to follow the same way.
Is that understood by the fire companies?
Oh, absolutely. Commissioner, with all due respect, what you're talking about, I understand.
I'm sure you do.
Is the next step.
Right.
And
We do it with the preventive maintenance that we approved a couple years ago. They don't get, they have to pay the bill, and then we reimburse them. They could send a bill over, and if it's not acceptable, we say, no, we're taking that $800 because it's not one of the things that was approved many years ago by the Board of Commissioners. And we only reimburse them for $1,000 instead of $1,800. So that, it still goes through our office, just like this will and the physicals do. The physical
Yes.
bill is sent to us to pay the bill. So
Manager Manfredi and Barron are absolutely correct. We've talked about this, and as I said, that is the next step. I mentioned the audits. We do everything the right way. This was just to justify the request, but in terms of, I guess I would put it, administering the funds would absolutely have to follow all township accounting procedures. It's just that simple, with bidding and contract and what have you.
And back to my last comment, my last question before, just, you know, we're raising the millage, we're raising revenues by $670,000. I want to understand that in 5 years, when this program is done, what are we expecting that whatever's, I mean, assuming that there's going to be cost increases in the fire service, just in operating, forgetting about capital, is going to whittle away some of that $670,000 in revenue. What's going to happen with the residual? Because I can't imagine that in 5 years, the operating cost of the fire service isn't going to go up $670,000 unless, you know, John has a golden car driving around the township.
The hope of
Commissioner,
Well,
one thing
let me mention one
I
thing.
will say is, those monies and through the accounting processes we have to follow cannot be spent on anything that does not provide for the fire service to our constituents.
Right, now I'm aware of that. I'm
It
just.
has to be dedicated to
Right,
that.
and I appreciate that, but you understand the question.
I
is,
understand.
Right.
You're gonna see that needle move off of the $670,000 of full capital to partial going into operating because of expenditures that are just gonna inherently go up. What's gonna happen with the residual at the end of the 5 years?
I think what you're going
Are
to
we
see.
gonna find another way to spend that residual?
No, I think the combination, by not separating capital and operating and dedicating this fire tax is, and I think, again, year one, the subject to annual review and approval. I expect, candidly, that this tax increase will go beyond 5 years. It's a 5-year strategic plan, and they have capital expenses, but every decision we make today is going to be, where's this going to keep us 5 and 10 years from now? So the goal is, we could very easily, when I sat down with Mr. Schramm, said, you know what, Dave, this number doesn't make sense to me, this number needs to be half this. And we could have cut that tax down. But looking at all the numbers and all the projections over time, it didn't make sense to do that. You'd be back here, in my opinion, in 2 years raising a tax again. And I don't know if that makes any sense, especially since you're going to probably be back here in 2 years. We will probably be back here in 2 years talking about how are we going to fund the parks, how are we going to fund the pools, how are we going to fund stormwater, and now we're also talking about how are we going to fund the second or third year of the fire facilities. So I think breaking it down this way will dedicate the dollars that if you accept a proposal, if you approve the fire tax, you are dedicating dollars to the fire service. The other thing I want to just mention is, I started to say this, in the budget, you know, the fire marshal office, for some reason, the transfer to capital was always within the general fund and out of, and shown there. It kind of ties into fire marshal's office. It's really separate. We're going to move that for the November 8th and put that into the fire, so it's coming out of fire.
Right.
It's just an accounting thing, but it'll more accurately reflect going forward. And I know that Fire Marshal Rohr and Director Barron had already had that conversation.
Can we sunset the millage increase for the residual?
Well, every year you enact your ordinance, so my suggestion would be that, you know, just, we can certainly put a note to, in year 5, reconsider it. but it's an annual tax. You redo it annually. You don't set it
Right, I
for 5
understand that,
years.
but we're committing to a
That's right.
five-year, committing to a five-year strategic plan here. And the whole reason for doing a good portion of the increase is to fund the findings in this, or the needs of the fire companies. But after 5 years, when this is hopefully expired and all this work has been accomplished, can we sunset the residual that hasn't been pushed over to the operating?
But only
expenses?
300 of the 663 is tied to the
I know, that's what I
facilities
said.
plan.
I know.
So my suggestion would be to not sunset it or look at sunsetting it until next year. Once we have the feasibility study done and we know what the actual needs are, then we'll be able to look next year and see if sunsetting it in 10 years makes sense.
Okay.
We felt it was important that it's a 5-year strategic
got it.
plan, 1 year at a time.
Right.
And the manager's correct.
Yeah, no, I understand, yeah, I get it. So,
Okay, any other questions by commissioners? Commissioner Myers.
Actually, not a question, a statement. Given the age of these buildings.
Yes.
I actually thought 60,000, and I realized it's not going to be completely 60,000, was not a significant number, with the age of these buildings, which they're not going to get younger, they're going to get older. I'm always concerned about recruitment and retention.
Yes.
We've been working on that, I know, my 20 years.
Yes.
And every year, we have firefighters that are aging out, which is
Yes.
why it's so important that your recruitment, and especially your retention,
Yes.
is an ongoing process. I've been in some of these bathrooms in the firehouses, and
Yes.
they're in dire need
Yes.
of upgrading.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by commissioners? If there are none, I thank Mr. John Rohr, the fire marshal, and Mr. Dave Schramm, the fire department administrator and accreditation manager.
Thank you all very much for
Thank you.
your interest in our
Thank you,
strategic plan. Right.
Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, we have Mr. Ken Davidson. And with you, Ken, is whom?
Commissioners, I've asked Captain Brian Levin to sit in with me this evening. He is our billing and finance expert. So
Okay.
in case you have any tough questions, he's my phone a friend as far as numbers.
Okay, and you're going to be covering the ambulance services for those watching.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. Again, I'm here on behalf of Second Alarmers Rescue Squad. I'm sure that everybody knows that we are the emergency medical services agency that serves Abington Township. I went back to one of our more senior members to try and get a time frame of exactly when we started serving the township. And they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a first aid kit that was on one of the first trucks that served the township and was the equipment that we carried as far as medical aid. I'm told that the first services were in the 50s and that the ambulance service really started in the 70s. So obviously we've been here for quite some time. My colleague, Assistant Chief Garrett, has the pleasure of coming every month to your public safety meetings and talking to you about all the wonderful services that we provide and our engagements with the community. And at the risk of sounding arrogant, I feel confident in saying that I think that you have one of the top-notch emergency medical services systems in the area and that we proudly serve the township from multiple stations. One of the questions that we frequently get at a presentation is, well, how many ambulances are there that make this happen in our township? So there are 2 stations that are located permanently in Abington Township. We have 1 ambulance staffed 24 hours a day at our Elkins Park station. That's across from McKinley Fire Company. That was a new building built on township property in 2006, and a crew operates from there 24 hours a day. And we have an outstanding relationship with Edge Hill Fire Company, so I can speak to some of those restroom facilities as well. And we have a truck that's stationed there during the day, 12 hours, at Edge Hill Fire Company. We rent a small space from them, and they very graciously give us full run of the second floor and have made us at home, and we respond from there. In addition to that, we have a couple of other units that are stationed outside of the township that do have primary response within the township. We have an ambulance at our Willow Grove station 24 hours a day. That responds to calls for the most part north of Susquehanna Road along the York Road corridor and the Willow Grove portions of Abington Township. And then we have an ambulance in Hatboro that's also staffed 24 hours a day, and that unit will deploy and move down further south a little bit if we're busy, and so it's not uncommon to see the ambulance from Hatboro show up on a call in Abington Township. Abington Township represents 5,646 calls for service a year for our department. We do serve 7 municipalities, but notably Abington is certainly the largest, and that represents 42.6% of our calls. For most of my presentation tonight, I'm going to speak in terms of billable calls, calls that we provide service for, that we're able to generate a bill to the patient or the patient's insurance company, and we'll talk a little bit about the other calls that we respond to where there is no fee for service or no bill provided. But our billable calls in Abington Township in 2017 were 3,503. Manager Manfredi and the township staff have been phenomenal in granting me time several times over the course of the past year and a half to talk about EMS finance and EMS funding. I have beat his ear quite extensively and come in multiple times to explain the challenges that we're facing. And then in September, our friends at the Pennsylvania Township News did a phenomenal article that kind of summed it up in a few pages. And I'm sure that you guys have had the opportunity to review that. If anybody wants a hard copy, they were kind enough to send us many copies to distribute. But it really does a good job of painting the picture. And I believe I've spoken in front of the Public Safety Committee in recent years that EMS in general, especially in Pennsylvania and in the region, is in a financial crisis and on the edge of an impending collapse. We have ongoing issues with the insurance carriers and games with reimbursement that they play. They send payments to patients who don't forward us the payments. They try and get out of their responsibility to cover services when they can. We are obviously seeing the cost of providing service go up. I guarantee you the equipment we carry today costs a little bit more than this did, even taking inflation into consideration. The cost of vehicles are going up, and again, the demands on the system. So we're kind of faced with an increased rising cost of providing service, which is logical. That happens with everything. And unfortunately, that's being countered by a decrease in reimbursement for those services, which is creating a problem for us. Quite frankly, for many years, emergency medical services was the one discipline of public safety that could kind of self-fund. We had the ability to bill patients, and we have the ability to bill patients. So unlike our partners in police and fire, who have always had to rely heavily on municipal funding, for many years we've been able to sustain or we've been able to offset most of the costs with our fee-for-service. Unfortunately, the times are changing, and if you review the article, again, it does a pretty good job. I was very pleased that when they put the numbers in the article, they all pretty much matched up with what I've been telling Manager Manfredi for a couple of years. So it was reassuring to see that most of the state agrees with our assessment, and it also is reassuring to see that we're not any different than any other agencies in the state. So we did some simple math, and I understand that I'm standing here tonight showing you a request that's far in excess of what was put into the proposed budget. I have had some discussions with Manager Manfredi about that, and we understand that. But I think it's important for you to see where we came up with our original request and understand that we knew coming into it. I understood when I walked into his office and did the calculations and told him that I needed to increase or request an increase in the ambulance millage tenfold. I realized that was a pretty steep request. But I still wanted to come in and show the numbers and explain how we came to those numbers. And I understand that this is something that we have to kind of tackle in small steps. And I certainly want to assure you that the numbers that we've seen that were put in there will go a long way to help us with this and help offset the crisis somewhat. So we took our total operating expense in 2017 and we divided that by our billable calls, and that gives us an average cost per billable call of $601. And that's pretty much on par. I think the state average is $601.25. So again, we were pretty close to what the average cost for service is for a billable call. We then look at the revenues generated from calls in Abington Township. So this includes patient payments, insurance payments, any funds that have come into us as a result of these billable calls. Again, there were 3,503 billable calls, and the average revenue per billable call was $484. I will tell you that the average revenue per billable call does span pretty significantly amongst the 7 municipalities that we serve. And unfortunately, in Abington Township, it is among the lower of those numbers. So some of the other municipalities have an average revenue per billable call closer to $565 or $575, which helps to cover some of that gap. We then took the number of billable calls, and if you multiply that by the deficit per billable call of $117, you come up with $409,851, which was what was reflected in our first request to the manager's office and the number in our discussions. So again, relatively simple math to calculate it. We basically realized that we're losing approximately $117 every time the truck goes out to transport a patient. And then we tried to find the most equitable way to account that to a municipality. So that's why our deficit per billable call is calculated municipal specific. So that number is specific to Abington Township, that we're essentially losing $117 per billable call. I've talked to you a lot about billable calls. There are a lot of services that Second Armors provide that are not billable. This is a quick breakdown for you, and I believe it's in the reports that you have. Patient refusals account for a lot of them. This would also account for fire standbys, when we assist the police department, if we go out to an accident and there's no injuries there, some of the public relations and various details that we go to. And then some of the additional services that Second Alarmers provides as kind of our partnership to Abington Township. We did work with the police department. We continue to work with the police department and their staff on the naloxone training and the medical oversight and the support for them. We attend and provide attendance at all of our various trauma training programs for the members of Abington Police and Abington Fire Department. So we are fortunate to be able to use the great training facility. And in return for that, when we run our programs for trauma care, mass casualty care, all the various disciplines of public safety, we always welcome the members of our peers in public safety in the township at no cost to those programs. We provide representation in emergency management and the EOC during large planned and unplanned events. So if we have when the storms arise, we have a representative here. We work with EMA. We kind of help fill out the EMS or the health and safety function of that. And we provide standby services for a fair number of the large public events. The 4th of July parade is one that comes to mind. The various community car shows, the 24-hour relay, the school graduation, some other events that occur. We provide staffing and crews to stand by at those events and assist with public safety. And then recently, we've also been included with the township and the police department and the school district in working with some of the active shooter, active threat medical training and consulting. Again, it's great to stand up with our peers and explain that in Abington Township, public safety has worked with the various businesses and the school districts, and this was one of the first townships around where the school districts had some trauma supplies and training and led the way on that, and we were front runners. So there's a lot of things that Second Alarmers does with the township and with the municipality that don't pertain to these billable calls that we go on. Obviously, they're sort of factored into our cost for service and expenses that we're not able to recoup through billing. And lastly, we do provide the infection control designated officer for the police department and township staff. We're fortunate that our president, Mrs. Crewley, has a background in infection control, worked for the county health department for many years, and is a designated officer, and so we have filled that role. If there's ever an issue of contamination or an exposure, we have a 24-hour availability to get an expert on the phone and help the township with that. So when we made our request, I come back to those numbers. We took the billable calls, the deficit per call, and that's where our $409,000 request came from. Again, when we calculated that using the number of $3,473,000 as the value of a mill, which I believe is pretty close to what we have there, we were looking at 0.11 mils. Our current funding had been at 0.01 mils. And using the township average household assessment, it translates to roughly $1,650 per household. Again, we realize that nobody wants to pay more in taxes, but we think that for the value received, for the 24-hour coverage and service and the prompt response and the outstanding medical care, we really think this is a pretty reasonable request. And it's certainly going to help us continue to keep our head above water while we work with the insurance companies, the various carriers. We work with our state and local legislators to get some various legislative relief to try and improve funding and reimbursement in emergency medical services. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions from commissioners? Commissioner, no? Okay. Commissioner, let's go with Commissioner Gillespie and then Commissioner Spiegelman.
Sorry, not used to that. We get a donation thing every year. Do you do well with that?
We do okay with that. It is going down. And unfortunately, I actually ran the numbers earlier this evening. In Abington Township, the response has been going down a little bit each year. So we get, in Abington Township, about an 11%, I think a 10.4% response to that. We recognize that direct mail and a fund drive that way is difficult. We've taken some steps in the past couple of years to do some electronic fund drive. We've used social media. We realize that sometimes we're another piece of mail that comes. We have definitely found that it is a generational thing. There are many residents who sit waiting, and if it doesn't come in the mail the day they expect it, they're on the phone, and we're very grateful for that. But we've also realized that there's a full generation that envelopes go in the trash and they never open them and they don't see that. So unfortunately, in Abington Township, I want to say in 2017, it was about $130,000 that came from the fund drive.
Wow. It is a shame because until they need it,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, it's worth even $100. It's certainly worth it. Same with the fire company. You know, they send their donations, send it in. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I guess it is a generational thing, but I do appreciate, I've certainly had younger family members that needed the second alarmers.
And we very much appreciate, there is definitely a contingency of support that, like I said, if they don't If they don't receive it the same week every month, they're on the phone asking where it is, and we appreciate that.
Commissioner Spiegelman and then Commissioner Schreiber.
Again, this is actually related to Commissioner Gillespie's question. The donations, and I guess the subscription service, that's already factored into the revenue per.
Correct.
Okay, that's in that number. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. One of your earlier slides that showed the 409,000 or whatever, it was 2017.
Yes.
So now we're working on 2019. My question is, like, how far back are you that you've been in a deficit, and what is going on with that? Like, have you been able to find other means to?
So, like many organizations, we've had some reserve funds that we have set aside over the years, and we try to dip into that minimally. I would say for the past 3 years, we've had to pass a deficit budget. We've been fortunate that's been a slight deficit, so we've been able to cover that. There are, again, other things that we have foregone or delayed. We, too, need some bay doors replaced and some infrastructure improvements that we've kind of held together as long as we could. Replacement of the ambulances is one of the big issues, so we have a great engineering staff, and we kind of keep these trucks running as long as possible. We have downsized the vehicles a little bit, so we have vehicles that will still get the job done, but are maybe not quite as ideal as the vehicles we used to purchase. So we've kind of cut. We're at the point where that is really, we foresee that if we were to have to keep doing that for a couple more years, we would reach an impasse. What has happened, whether it's through hubris or ego in a lot of places in the state, is that the EMS agencies come every month to their commissioners and they report all of the good. They report everything wonderful they did. They tell you about all the accreditations we've gotten. They tell you everything is great, and they don't tell you, hey, there's a problem, we need money. And then what happens is they show up at a hearing or a meeting of the commissioners in September and say, if you don't give us $1 million by December, we're going to have to close the doors. And unfortunately, we've seen that even locally, and especially if you look out towards Harrisburg and the Penn State area, you're seeing that with agencies, that they hold on as long as they can, and then by the time they ask for help, it's too late. Our board and our philosophy in recent years has been, we can't do that. We've been serving Montgomery County for 80 years. We want to serve it for another 80, which is why we're coming to the municipalities now and saying, hey, we need help. We need to work on a long-term revenue stream for this, and we need to find a way to address this long-term.
Good. Any other questions? Commissioner Sanchez.
Ken,
And then
you may have mentioned this, Ken, but what's the amount, and maybe on the next slide, that's attributable to the, I think back one, to the insurance non-reimbursement aspect of it? Did you have a number for that?
Yeah, Commissioner, I don't believe I have it in here, but department-wide, I believe we are looking at close to $250,000 a year. I could get you an Abington-specific number on that. But the issue with that is that first of all, about 80% of our patients are Medicaid or Medicare beneficiaries, so there's already a reduction in a minimal amount. Medicare has gone on record as saying they don't provide enough compensation to cover the cost, and you can contact your federal legislator about that. The commercial insurance companies are typically required by their contract to pay the full fee. But the game that they play right now, and it really truly is a game, is that they will pay that to the patient, and they'll pay a small portion. So let's use the example, if we were to bill $2,000, they'll mail the patient a check for $450, and they're very careful with their language. They'll say, we think this is what Second Alarmers should accept. And if you send us that payment, we will tell you if you call your insurance company and ask them to reprocess it as a 911 transport, that your contract with them, your employer's contract with them, typically requires them to pay it in full. And they will frequently send the follow-up check for the remaining $1,600 a week or two later. The issue that we have is, and you can't make this up, we've had patients call, and again, Captain Levin heads our billing department, and tell us they've taken their grandchildren to Disney World with that money, or they've made a car payment with that money. So the amount of money that we're not receiving from them is a large amount. And then again, we also have patients who just don't pay their bill, and we have a large amount of outstanding debt year to year in each township. So ideally, if everybody paid their bills, if the insurance companies paid the way they should, I probably wouldn't be standing in front of you, and we'd probably be able to self-sustain. Unfortunately, though, that's not the case.
Is there any type of thing that you've seen in your, sounds like you're well-versed in this, in the statewide, like are there consulting agencies that can help with this collection for like, you know, on a contingent fee basis? Or
So we do use a collections agency. We kind of do what we refer to as soft medical collections. So we actually are required to do some of that. So we We've looked at it. A couple other municipalities in our previous discussions have actually had us go through our full collection process with them and brought in their consultants. And at the end of the day, they said, yeah, we think you're doing what you need to do. So we do in-house billing, and then at a point, it goes to a pre-collection service, and then it goes to collections. There are state advocacy agencies. The state has done some to try and help. They passed a bill about a year and a half ago that was called direct payment. Ostensibly, it was to say if we want to sign up on a list, the insurance companies will be required to pay us directly. Right. The problem is that we then have to accept what they pay. So you become a de facto in-network provider without the benefits of being in-network. Right. So the legislature was able to say they passed a bill for us. The insurance companies like to tout that, hey, there is a bill, you can sign up on this list if you want. Unfortunately, it doesn't help us. So there's been some traction recently. Medicaid just gave us the first increase in over 7 years, but now it's going to take some time to filter down, and we'll see if how that gets through to the carriers and if we actually get those fees. And they recently passed a bill that requires these carriers to pay if we provide treatment and don't transport the patient. That passed, I think, 2 days ago. The governor signed it. The problem is we also don't know what that's going to look like as far as dollars. So there is some relief in sight. Unfortunately, not enough.
Gotcha. All right, thank you very much.
Vice President Klein.
So this, the money that the millage that's being proposed that Mr. Manfredi has in our budget, which is the .01 mils increase as opposed to the 0.11 mils increase, difference of the 409 to whatever it is, 100 and...
I believe it's a .04 increase, correct? .04.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, I've read backwards. .04. So that's whatever that money, that millage, whatever revenue that raises, how is that, that's money that's being paid by Abington taxpayers. What's the assurance that that money is not being filtered into the rest of the second alarmer system? You have what, how many municipalities you're servicing?
We have 7 municipalities, and we're trying to work with all. As you can imagine, getting 7 municipalities to do something in 1 year is a bit difficult. So we have a couple others that are looking at enacting millages. I guess you can be proud to say, if it's a good thing, that Abington is the one that has already had a millage for many years. So here we're asking for an increase, and the other municipalities have had to ask for the enactment of a tax. So we see that there's 3, possibly 4 this year that will enact it or will increase their contributions to us. Unfortunately, it's very difficult because an ambulance is an ambulance, and it might go to a call in Abington and it might go to a call in a neighboring community. So when we buy a new ambulance, that ambulance is to serve the department. What we have explained to the other municipalities and what we continue to explain is that we have to do something to improve this revenue. So if we don't receive the increased municipal funding, that will mean an increase in the fee for service in those townships, and you'll end up with residents receiving bills that are higher than what they would receive. So we're going to have to do something to make up that adjustment. Right now, we're at the point where we feel the bills that are out there, we frequently get calls and complaints and concerns, and I'm sure as local elected officials, you probably hear some of those complaints and concerns about why is my ambulance bill $2,000. So our goal is within the next year or two to have everybody on board with some form of municipal funding, and again, that's why we tried to use the municipal-specific deficit to ask the township to make up, and that's our ultimate goal as to where we are.
Right, but what's the municipal specific benefit of raising the millage? I mean, I know there's a benefit in general because it keeps the ambulance service funded, but what's the specific township-wide benefit?
It's twofold. So it keeps the service funded, so we're here and we're able to provide the service. We don't have to close the station. We don't have to cut staffing. And then it also prevents the residents from seeing a sharp increase in the fee for service. And it kind of distributes it. So right now, Mrs. Smith, who's on a fixed budget, requires an ambulance ride, and she ends up being billed $2,500 because somebody else isn't paying their bill or because there's a deficit there. So the township is helping to offset some of that deficit so that we're able to keep that rate as low as possible for Mrs. Smith and for everybody. And really, it's keeping the solvency of the organization. It's keeping the organization alive to provide the service, which is a shared service, which is common amongst public safety. I mean, we have mutual aid agreements, and obviously the ambulance from our Elkins Park Station, when called upon, responds to Cheltenham to provide mutual aid. Likewise, Cheltenham's ambulance responds to Abington to provide mutual aid. Cheltenham's ambulance is funded by their taxpayers. So it's kind of the service needs to be here, and we need to be able to serve everybody. And we're asking each municipality to help us with their share based on the deficit of incurred and calls in their municipality. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to quantify, but, you know, if you don't, let's say Abington was, for the sake of argument, let's say Abington was the only one that had a millage and increased the millage.
Right.
Right? And then your other municipalities didn't have anything. And you're still operating at this deficit, and we decide to kick in additional revenue through the millage increase.
Right.
What's the benefit?
So obviously, we can't continue to operate losing funds. So if other, we're working with the other municipalities, and I can't tell you that all in 1 year they're going to come on, but if in a year or two the others have not come to that, if we're not able to make up the deficit by increasing the rates, if we have to look at cutting services, clearly we're not going to cut the services in the township that is supporting us. So if 5 years from now, and I hope this never happens, 5 years from now we're faced with the fact that we can't staff 5 stations and we have to make a cut on that, we're clearly not going to cut a truck in Abington and continue to serve another municipality that's not helping with the funding. Our focus is going to be on the municipalities that are supporting with the funding and that are paying a fair share. Is
That gets me a little bit closer to what I was looking for.
I wish I had a better answer for you.
Well, I mean, I know it's somewhat nebulous because, like you said, there are the shared events where an ambulance that's sitting in Abington, it's not just territorial, they
Right.
cross over the line. So I know there are instances where the benefits, but I guess my point would be is if the millage was to be increased, what assurances do the taxpayers have, and the board here has, that Abington's not going to be first on the cut list as opposed to,
Absolutely. I understand that, and again, clearly, the municipalities that are supporting us with the level of support we need are the ones that get the priority and are going to be the ones that we're in it with. The others, I don't want to say they're going to have a certain amount of time to come up to speed, or else we'll have to look at cutting service. Again, whether it's a cut of service, whether it's an increase in the rates that their residents are paying, or what, clearly the priority is going to go to the municipalities that are supporting us and are providing that financial support.
Okay. We'll go with Commissioner Zappone, then Commissioner Rothman, and then Commissioner Spiegelman.
Chief, when's the last increase that Second Alarmers received? Was it in '94, I believe?
I believe so. I believe that it was a similar number that was put, I believe the last contract was signed in 2006, or it was an amendment to the contract when we built the station in Elkins Park. But I believe that carried over the same numbers that had been there.
I'll kind of make it simple for everybody to understand. If a resident in this township in the middle of the night has chest pains, who do they call? Second Alarmers, okay? I blacked out of my house some years ago. Second Alarmers was there for me, okay? So I sit on the board of Second Alarmers. I know what's going on. I see what's going on financially there, and we need help, okay? Or just like the chief said, it's not going to be there. So ask your residents, go around and ask your residents, who do they call when they're sick? They call these guys right here. And it's about time we stick up and fight for them and support them as well as our fire departments, okay? You smell smoke in the middle of the night, you call Abington Fire Department. You have a prowler in your backyard at night, you call Abington Police. Let's get together here, okay? That's what it's all about, protecting the residents of this township.
Commissioner Rothman.
I feel like I should speak loud after that.
By the way, I'm the one who convinced them to go to the hospital that time, so you can thank me later.
I have a question. It's serious. I've heard about and personally experienced issues with insurance companies saying that Second Alarmers was out of network.
Correct.
I'm not exactly sure, number one, how, I don't know if you have any insight into how that can even happen. I mean, you pick up the phone, you dial 911, someone comes to your house, you don't have, it's not your dentist or something like that where you can pick in network. And
Correct.
The second part of my question would be, what does a resident do in speaking with you about getting their insurance to pay what you rightly deserve, and which could help bridge the gap between, and by the way, I'm in favor of supporting the increase we need because I know the importance of your service, but to me it seems like there's some sort of gap in there that's just inexplicable.
Very good questions. So we are out of network. For the federal programs, Medicare, TRICARE, for state programs, Medicaid, all EMS services are required to be in-network or are in-network. So there is no such thing as an out-of-network Medicare ambulance service. As far as commercial insurance, they try to negotiate the same as they would with a physician. So again, if you have a variety of healthcare plans, obviously Aetna has their network, Independence Blue Cross has their network. I like to give the example that every couple of years, for those of you who have younger children, you'll notice the Children's Hospital goes out of network. They say they're going to be out of network for Blue Cross. So when they try to negotiate with Blue Cross, if Blue Cross doesn't give them what they want, they say, well, we're going to leave the network, and all of your customers who have young children won't be able to use Children's Hospital as in-network anymore. Unfortunately, we're not as big as Children's Hospital, and unfortunately, we're not viewed as quite as important, I guess, in the public eye as far as negotiating with the insurance companies. So if we were to go in-network with the insurance companies, the amount that they would approve, that they would contractually allow, is not enough to cover the service. It would be more of a loss for us. And they use the term negotiate relatively liberally when they talk about it. We've actually reached out to them recently. So they recently testified at the state level, and they talked about wanting to bring us in-network for credentialing purposes, for fraud prevention, and for a couple of other reasons. And they neglected to mention so they could pay us less. So we reached out to them, and we spoke with the contracting officer, and we threw numbers back and forth at them. And at the time, our fee-for-service was around $1,600. But we realized that the way their payment practices, we were bringing in about $800 per call on that. And we said to Blue Cross, we'll make you a deal. Pay us $1,200 a call and we'll take it. Pay it directly. And they said, no, we can't do that. We'd rather take our chances on owing $1,600. We'd rather pay the patient $1,600 than pay you $1,200 because we want you to come in network and take $400. So you would be hard-pressed to find a 911 ambulance service around that is in-network. It does exist. Some of the municipalities in Bucks County that get a lot of casino money, or that get a much higher, I mean, there's EMS agencies in Bucks County that get a 2 mil tax in their municipalities. So they're able to do a calculated risk on it and say, okay, we will go in network, we'll take the lesser reimbursement, and it essentially, the reimbursement there is offsetting the municipal cost of EMS, whereas what we're proposing is the municipal cost offsetting the reimbursement. I don't know if that makes sense. So you don't have a choice. When you call 911, an ambulance is going to come, but in Montgomery County, you're not going to get an in-network ambulance. If you look at your summary of plan benefits for almost all commercial insurance companies, it'll talk about what's covered, and it will say in there 911 ambulance service covered in full, 9 times out of 10. Again, they won't talk to us. The insurance companies won't talk to us. Captain Levin leads a billing department of 5 staff that are phenomenal. Our goal is for the patient to have their insurance that they've paid for. Everybody, their employer or the patient has paid for that insurance. So our goal was to have that insurance cover it for them. So while we can't be the ones necessarily to call the insurance company, we can provide counsel and advice to the patients. We can say to the patient, this is what we're showing, this is what the computer system is showing. It's funny, if you ever hear Captain Levin answer the phone, he'll say to the patient, yep, I bet you they sent you a check for $453.22. And they're like, wow, how'd you know that? Because we know the system. So we will advise them of what to do. We'll advise them to contact the insurance company to explain that it was 911 service and that the insurance carrier will reprocess it. We do everything we can to advocate for the patient. We do everything we can to help, whether it's conference calling the insurance company or explaining it. Our biggest hurdle is that the patients don't call us or don't, they just kind of let it go and they assume that it's covered. Some people assume that it is tax funded. They assume that we get a significant amount of tax funding, so they don't feel the need to work with us. So our basic mantra is if the patient's going to work with us, we'll work with them to do everything we can to get it covered. We want to see the out-of-pocket expense for the patient be as minimal as possible. Unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to get the patients to work with us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just follow up, I think it's, we up here as commissioners often deal with pretty easy issues, but some are really troubling. And the point that the people that are calling an ambulance are, oftentimes elderly and don't have the funding or are just in some sort of tragedy because people aren't calling 911 and having an ambulance come for no reason. At the same time, people think that it's fully covered because it says it's fully covered. So I don't know what it is that can be done, and it might not be something that particularly relates to what we're discussing right now as to budgeting and supporting you and your group, but some sort of outreach or education for people to understand that they may get a bill that's pretty high is something where I know multiple neighbors, friends, family have dealt with this, and it's troubling. So I thank you, and I thank you for working with people that are calling and don't have any information or aren't getting good information from their insurance companies. But, you know, there's something that we should do to try to at least let people know that it could be a problem.
Point well taken, Commissioner. And we do, whenever everything goes out, a correspondence, it does have some additional information on it. So the invoices are somewhat customized depending on your insurance. So it will say, this is the fee for service. Based on the information we have, your insurance should cover this or you should do that. Again, unfortunately, it's 2018. Frequently, the bills hit the trash without somebody reading them. But we could certainly look at a better outreach program. We do some community, if we have large communities, or like we'll go down to the plaza at Foxcroft, and we do presentations. But we could certainly look at trying to find a way to get that out in advance of the service being needed so that people understand it. That's a good point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for the record, I don't think that there's anybody here who doesn't support and applaud and respect the work that Second Alarmers does. I'm guessing I'm not going to have a single resident who would even blink or balk at the notion of this increase. So just for the record, I mean, you know, decades ago when I was in the EMT, our volunteer corps got by doing a coin drop at the corner. Don't think that's going to cut it for your expenses. So
I think Officer Posey would be upset if I took a boot out of the corner.
Yeah, and also the Penn State kids, because they do their coin drop. You don't want to conflict with their territory. Really, these questions, you know, again, in case there's any confusion at all, these questions are really just so when our residents ask us, we're able to answer.
Absolutely.
Just jumping off of Commissioner Klein's question. It'll be, it'll be made, and he asked about what is the benefit to Abington versus the other municipalities. Just to be clear, if, and I think it's probably going to be when we approve this ambulance millage increase, our residents will not have to pay a premium, an additional fee for service that would have to be paid by the residents of the municipalities that choose not to support you by introducing a millage.
Correct, and I don't want to quite put the cart before the horse. So again, the 7 municipalities, we have agreements of different length and different times, and we're at various points in working with them. So I'm not going to tell you that January 1st, another municipality is going to go up. But we have certainly been pretty clear with all the municipalities that we're working with that this is the first step to help, and that if we don't get the support from the municipality, then unfortunately the rates will have to be adjusted. And certainly we're not going to, I mean, there's still from time to time will probably be rate increases as everything goes up, but certainly we're not going to have I don't want to use the term excise fee, but we're not going to have an additional supplement in there to the township residents that are supporting us through their tax millage.
Great. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. At this time, Lieutenant Chris Porter of the Abington Police Department.
Thank you, President Luker and members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity tonight to come out and provide some explanation of our in-car camera system, our body-worn camera system. That's a significant and substantial project, as outlined in the budget proposal there. And with me tonight, obviously, Chief Malloy's here, Lieutenant McGee's here as well, and I have two representatives from the Axon Corporation that have come as well that can answer any questions that we might have that may be beyond the scope of perhaps any of our knowledge, although I think we're pretty well versed in everything at this point in time. But they'll be available after the meeting as well if you choose to ask any questions or want to meet outside for any reason or purpose. So why we're here today is the law, the Act 22, the Wiretap Act. Pennsylvania's been known as to be one of the most restrictive states in the United States as far as our regulations on recording other individuals' conversations and actions. And recently, this Act 22 Wiretap, what's called the Wiretap Act, was amended and made more law enforcement friendly, if you will. And it removes a few restrictions that we had as far as being able to record individuals and specifically for the use of our law enforcement activities. And communications made in the presence of law enforcement, as it says up there. And one of the things it does cover is an approved device is being utilized to intercept communications for official use, which is important, and I'll talk about that in a minute when we come to our policy. Something else is that it removed is some of the exceptions, and before we were required to announce that we were recording somebody and things of that nature. So this act is really the law, the change in the legislature that happened recently that enables us to move forward with a program such as this. And one other important thing to mention is the Right to Know Act does not govern how somebody obtains any recordings that we obtain in the future. And we can provide more information on that later if you'd like.
Excuse me, Lieutenant
Yes,
Porter,
sir.
could you stand closer to the mic, or?
Is that better?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving forward, there's another important piece of this puzzle is our policy that we have to implement here. And as you know, we are accredited both nationally and through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we've looked at all the model policies throughout the country, actually. And not only that, we've had a temporary policy in place when we tested these body cameras, started that process about 3.5 years ago, which Lieutenant McGee led that process. And since then, we've revamped that policy to match the legislation and some of the laws that are now in place. And some of the things that we need to address in that policy is the no pre-recording of audio on the body-worn camera to prevent inadvertent recordings of private or privileged information. And there's some more technical aspects behind that. The video still buffers and it records early, things like that. And some of the things we do with our policy to address some of the data storage issues we've outlined there as well. Some of the things that we should and should not record. So we have taken a comprehensive look at that, and we've had that policy vetted by other professionals in our industry, as well as the union and the members of the department, to make sure that we are covering all our bases when we do move forward with a project such as this. And again, there's some areas that obviously that we don't want to record and that we're going to make sure that we do not record out of common sense and courtesy and privacy reasons for everyone involved. So now we're here. What's the need? Currently, our in-car camera system, which is the only thing that we have, is approximately 8 years old. And you think, well, that's not that outdated. However, when we got those products and we installed that, we subsequently found out that they were not the top of the line nor the cutting edge, and perhaps mediocre in the realm of what was available at that time when we installed those or when the police department purchased those. They did the job, they did it well for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and then of course the warranties ran out and we ran into problems. The technology now is outdated. It's severely outdated as compared to what's out there. The support, we don't have any support for our system as far as effective support, and what I mean by that is the support now involves us, send your product to us, and for just shy of $1,000, we'll take a look at it and fix it for you. Which is, in terms of a fiscal responsibility, just completely irresponsible to throw money at a bad product in our eyes. And again, like I mentioned at the onset, it is only in-car cameras. That's our only capability at this point in time. As the warranty ran out, of course, the repair cost increased, and that's what we're faced with there. So after comprehensive research and study, it's been going on for about the last 3.5 years, the department feels strongly of going with Axon. May not be familiar to everybody, but if I say the word TASER, that used to be, that's Axon's formerly known as TASER. And it's a worldwide company. They're very large, and there's several reasons that we want to go with them. One of in that proposal that you have for that project for us is a body-worn camera for each patrol officer, and we feel that that's important, that we don't interfere with inadvertent recordings, mix up, and important for evidentiary purposes for mixing up data that's recorded by a certain officer for a certain purpose or anything such related to that. It's integrated with our in-car camera system, so they work in tandem. I have the body camera here with me. This is about the size of it, and certainly answer any questions for you after the meeting if you'd like, but this is integrated directly with the in-car camera system. So they work hand in hand, they talk to each other, and they communicate well, and that's, so to have the in-car camera, we would need the body camera as well. Axon is the most up-to-date and evolving technology, bar none. We've attended conferences over the last 3 years steady and have surveyed all the manufacturers out there. And just as recently as last week, I believe it was, I don't know if you saw in the news, the New York City Police Department, New York Department, had their body cameras exploding on them. That is not this product, I can assure you that. We did see that product, we looked at that product, and we chose not to look any further at them. But one of the concerns for us is that we get the most up-to-date, and we want not that, but we want people that are evolving with technology. And we know in the government industry, sometimes that's difficult to do, to stay up-to-date with our technology. As it moves forward, sometimes we fall behind. And our citizens suffer from that. Our officers certainly do, and I think that they deserve more, and the chief agreed, and that's one of the important features here. And Axon is the proven industry leader. They are the big player in the game, and I think they have over 17,000 law enforcement agencies now. And just to give you an idea, some of the departments around us, we were first approached by Commissioner Ramsey of the Philadelphia Police Department to explain to us why Philadelphia Police Department is transitioning to Axon. University of Penn recently went with them. Ben Salem signed on. Lancaster City recently just signed, I believe, I was just informed that this evening, Lancaster City signed on, and several other municipalities around us and in the area, and of course across the state and in the country. Some of the features. This is a 5-year all-inclusive project. It has a warranty and replacement program, and by that I mean we are covered soup to nuts with the warranty. If an officer drops that in the water, steps on it, runs it over with a car, if it breaks on its own, we have some problem with it, that is replaced by warranty standards. It's through no fault of the officers. The replacement program, that would be a new body camera for each officer every 2.5 years. So after 2.5 years, they get a physical new camera. On top of that, I know others have expressed concerns to me, well, what about the software and the firmware behind that? And that was a concern of ours, and rightfully so. They addressed that quickly. Every 30 days, the software is updated in these products automatically, and every 60 days, the firmware is updated, something that's unheard of in our industry for sure moving forward. Data storage, this is a cloud-based data storage system that we already currently use with our TASER systems. And at this point in time, we've chosen the middle of the road based upon surveys from other agencies across the country and what they've used. And that is the only variable in this whole entire program. We are locked into the middle of the road amount of data storage, which both the people at Axon and the other departments that we've surveyed, some of the ones in New Jersey, similar and larger than us, including Cherry Hill, that we've talked to, feel that the data storage program that we picked will be sufficient. And again, we hope to address that as well through our policy moving forward about what we will and will not record and certain things that we'll eliminate there. One feature that's pretty interesting is citizen input. So oftentimes citizens, and this is all proprietary, I should mention, to Axon. Much of this you cannot find anywhere else, which is an outstanding feature. But moving forward, the citizen input is if something happens and a citizen has a camera in their business or their home, they can simply let the officer know. We can provide them with a login, and they can download their video automatically to attach it to any video that we have and to our reporting system. And that's pretty important because we're seeing more and more of that where a citizen wants to airdrop their video from their phone to our phone and things like that. But we have evidentiary considerations when we do something like that, as you can imagine. And this cloud-based system, evidence.com, that Axon is proprietary to Axon and that they use, provides us with the ability to not only do that, but, and just to give you an example, is if we have an incident that happens and there's a police officer involved with an incident, whatever it is, and it's caught on the body camera, and perhaps a commissioner calls and says, you know, what kind of information can you give me? Within minutes, we can give you access to the video to say, this is what we know. This is so you can see and understand exactly what transpired and help us be more transparent to the public overall, which is what we try to do. And obviously, I think that's a great feature, whereas now that would be an extended process at best, if in fact we can, and the only thing we would be able to retrieve would be the in-car camera on some of the cars. But the evidentiary citizens, it's CJIS compliant. I know that doesn't mean a lot to you, but rest assured, it needs to be that for us to move forward to have any type of effective program. And the records management system, this has a linking software, which is very nice as well, that nobody else offers. Whereas an officer involved with any type of incident, this video is attached directly and permanently, matter of fact, and can be used for later reference to the actual incident that is being reported. So that's a nice feature to have as well. Now let's get into the financial impact, because that's what we're here about. Presently, we have $112,190 allocated because we moved those funds, if you remember earlier this year, to a body-worn camera, centralized some of the other line items that have been out there for a few years, and we consolidated those monies. So the first year we're looking at an impact of $45,865, and then $109,657 every year thereafter, for just shy of $600,000 for a 5-year commitment to this product. Just backing up on that, and maybe, I don't want to go too fast, but I want to make sure everybody understands that we're talking about new equipment every 2.5 years for body-worn cameras themselves. We're talking about all the hardware, the installation. We've done some things where by getting these numbers to where they are, Axon's offered us a discount. And I believe it was one of the commissioners that asked during the, when we were consolidating funds, can we get a discount on that? And we went back at them, and we actually negotiated a significant discount by doing both of these programs together, somewhere in the tune of a little bit over $57,000 that we'll save by doing these both together, rather than trying to piecemeal body cameras for a few years and then move into the car cameras. So not only do we get one continuous operating platform, body and in-car cameras, but we get a discount by doing it together, and we can roll this out in one fell swoop, if you will, as soon as the products start coming in. Some possible funding sources in the future, and I know the manager, or Mr. Barron, talked already about the DEA seizure funding, and we can certainly comment on that a little bit more if you'd like to. If you'd like to hear something about that, we can. There are some monies, and we received a letter as recently as last week from the DEA of anticipated funding that is in what they call the pipeline for us to receive, and it's due to the work that one of our officers that's assigned to the DEA has done. And just to give you a little bit of background on that, the focus has shifted in the DEA from what used to be minor drug trafficking and drug infractions, where our officer was involved in, to now we're heavily involved in the opioid crisis and working with the DEA and prosecuting doctors and such that have been involved in this. And there is a significant more amount of money out there than what Mr. Barron mentioned, as indicated in some correspondence that we received this week from the DEA in hopes. But again, we don't know if that'll come through, but that is out there. And we're not counting on it, obviously, but we wanted to let you know that that is out there. And we do anticipate at some point in time receiving that. Grants, the questions always come up, well, what about grants and funding sources, whether it's federal, state, and local? There are grants out there. However, for federal, right now, the grant period's closed. And we do have 2 individuals that specifically search that for us continuously. We're told in May about the May timeframe, that we'll be able to, when the grant periods open up again, that we'll be able to apply for grants, which is something that we continuously search for and look to do. And we know how important that is. And we've gone as far as even researching some of the departments that have received funding and awarded grants in the past for body cameras and in-car cameras on what exactly they did to obtain that, to successfully obtain that funding. And we hope that we can apply some of those principles to Abington, and I think we will be able to. But we do realize that there are also some state and local opportunities to fund some of this as well, which we are working in. And Axon themselves has offered, and they do consistently across the board offer to help, and they do notify us when any grant funding periods open up that we can, that might be able to assist and help us out in that aspect. That's what I have on the body cameras. If there's a few other things, Mr. President, I'd like to comment on, if Mr. Manfredi is okay with that? About the budget, just because they relate to our budget. Specifically the traffic safety, we realize that that's a priority of the commissioners, and it's a priority of the police department as well. So, and you'll see in our budget something that hasn't been there before, and that's that traffic safety line. And historically, initially we started at a little over $130,000, I believe, and now we're down to about $67,000, working in some efficiencies and coming up with creative ways to address some of the concerns of not only you, the commissioners, but the citizens of the township. And some of that is based upon signage, replacing of signage that comes up new, that may be new or experimental, as well as replacing old and outdated signs, where we work with the highway department in doing that. And that's based upon pricing of signs and just a general survey of signage throughout the township. So if there's any other questions about that, I'd be happy to answer it. There was a question that came up about speed carts, and I know we've talked to several commissioners about that as well. Currently, we have 2 speed carts. We'd like to purchase more. They run an estimated $10,000 to $15,000 a piece, and these are the items that are on wheels that you see them around and have the signs that say you are going this fast. Unfortunately, they are very expensive, and we'd like to purchase a couple additional versions of those as well to put out there to increase motorist awareness throughout the township. There's another option is that too. It's called a speed sign, and we do have them. We have 2 of them on order. We're waiting for PennDOT to give approval to the vendor. Unfortunately, right now in Pennsylvania, there's only 1 vendor, and we are looking for the least expensive solution. And there's another vendor that's significantly less expensive than the current one that's available. So we anticipate before the end of this year that those 2 speed signs that we currently have funded will be available to us with PennDOT's approval, hopefully in the next few weeks. Again, we've heard that from PennDOT before, but we do know that there is official correspondence between PennDOT and the company to get those. And those are signs that we would put on a fixed object, a telephone pole, a light post. Again, just bringing awareness to motorists, speed, and things like that. And those can be also moved around, but not as easily, but we would anticipate doing that. Speed enforcement, a question has come up as well, like why aren't we using radar? Well, I think most everybody knows that radar is not authorized for municipal police officers in Pennsylvania, and we are one of the only states in the country that cannot do that. But there is a bill in I don't know what stage it's at right now, and could be approved, we don't know. However, one of the big things that we use radar for is impromptu speed surveys. Oftentimes residents call us about a speed issue on their street, or perhaps they bring it to your attention as the commissioners. And certainly we have right now, we have one antiquated, if I will mention that, radar gun that we go out there. And the radar guns, they will actually afford us the opportunity to do speed surveys, not only impromptu, but in other roadways that we currently are unable to do with the current method and version that we use, which is basically a box and two wires that go across the road. Radar guns would effectively allow us to do that. And our hopes would be if we could purchase 10 of them, we could get more speed surveys done at the times that matter the most and more realistic, and get that data back quicker so we can provide that information to the citizens and yourselves, of course, sooner than later. And then if you'll look in, just one thing to make you aware of in our budget there, we've consolidated 3 separate lines to more accurately represent, at least fiscally, what the police department's doing. Just line 061 has been consolidated to 053, 047 is consolidated to 055, and 054 has been consolidated into 040. And that was done, just like I said, to more accurately represent the functions of the police department. It in no way, shape, or form increased our manpower or things of that nature. It just is basically saying, you know, we're shutting this other line down and put those funds in a certain line. So you may see increases in certain lines that weren't there before. I know one's increased, it looks like it's 11.28% increase, which in fact, that's just because, it looks like that's because we consolidated that line. Overall, the police department budget's in line with the reflections that Mr. Barron mentioned earlier about the projected budget increase as far as our wages go, and the health or medical benefits, things that he had mentioned in the initial slides. That's all I have for the police department. I'm sorry I rushed through that, but if you have any questions, I'd be glad to speak to anything that I can.
Thank you, Lieutenant Porter. Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lieutenant, thank you so much for the Axon presentation. In the event that, you know, we purchase the Axon system, go in for 5 years, and for some reason after 5 years, another system, a better offer came along, would there be an option for Axon to provide all of that, all of the data on cloud storage, all of those data to the department so those wouldn't be lost forever?
Yes, sir, very good question, and thank you for asking that, because I know many probably had that question. Yes, that data that is recorded is ours. We own that data. Yes. That data is in a format that's very easily transferred to us, that we could put it on terabyte drives, whatever it might be that we can store locally. But yes, that's our data. We own that. And one other thing I'll mention is, if any point in time in our contract, it's actually spelled out. If any point in time the panel, the commissioners feel that you don't want to fund this project anymore, if you cease the funding on this, we don't have to. We're out of our contract. That's a caveat built into the contract, which is something that no other company that we looked at offered. Which is, they understand the business. They are from a law enforcement background, of course, obviously, you know, being involved with the TASER and everything like that. So that, too, plays into there. So if at some point in time the economy, something happens with the economy, or for whatever reason we can't fund this any longer, there is that out for us as well, and that's outlined in our contract.
Thank you, Lieutenant, and I truly look forward to the day when you come forward and say, we're ready to order radar guns.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
We'll put out a GoFundMe. Everyone will donate, believe me.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from commissioners? Vice President Klein.
So you're saying if we decide in a year not to use the body cameras, we can get out of the contract, or are we signed up for 5 years?
The lease agreement's for 5 years, but if next year it's decided not to be funded, I forget the exact section, I can look it up for you, but it's right there written in. As long as the commissioners decide to defund the project, We give them writing, and then we're out of it.
Is there penalties?
No, no penalties, except we have to return the merchandise.
Understood.
Sure.
So I guess I don't understand, maybe this is more a philosophical question, but why is this in capital? I mean, isn't this like a program? If the budget, if the township, if the commissioners were going to stay with this, this is an actual program within the police department, not really a capital expenditure. I know it's equipment and everything, but why is it in capital?
Because it is a capital asset under our fund balance policy. We talked about this in the
But
previous
it's a leased
meeting.
asset. It's not really an asset, it's a lease agreement.
But its value is greater than $10,000. You're talking about $100,000. Could you operationalize it? Sure. Is it a capital asset under our current finance policies? Yes.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't understand why something like this would be not in the operating budget as opposed to the capital budget. I mean, this is, regardless of whatever the cost is, I mean, there's plenty of things in the township budget that's above $10,000 in the operating budget. I don't understand. This is a program, this is something that's going to continue on, or potentially could continue on, and I don't know why it would be in capital. It just seems to be, I mean, philosophically a difference, but I don't understand.
There's no magic to it.
So, well, I mean, there's a difference between it being in capital and the difference between capital, you know, if this is a capital expenditure, right off the bat, we have $109,000 that we got to put towards the police capital budget.
It'll be more of an issue when we treat, I mean, the funding for capital comes from general. So if we put this in general, it's going to be that much less that can go to capital. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's really where we want to put it.
Right.
You traditionally have placed this in capital, so.
Okay.
Commissioner Klein, if I can just add one other thing to what Mr. Manfredi was saying. Nearly every other body camera company that we researched, they are just a specific pay us all now up front, and basically after a year or two, the cameras are yours. There's nothing that we'll do. There's no continuing fee. It's a one giant lump sum, and then they move on. So, and we have been budgeting for this in the capital line as well up till now, but I just wanted to add that into what Mr. Manfredi
Right,
was
but
saying.
that's a pure asset. I mean,
Yes,
you're
sir.
actually
Yes, sir. So that's
buying
the-
equipment,
that
if
is the
you're holding
difference.
on to it, it's your
Yes, sir.
asset. When you're leasing the equipment, I mean, there's no buyout of that equipment, I'm assuming. If we terminate the agreement in 5 years, we give everything back. It's not like we have a dollar buyout or any kind of buyout on the lease equipment.
Yes.
So to me, there's no asset involved here.
Yeah,
This is a program.
Absolutely. We are purchasing a program, and just what you said, you know, there's new body cameras every 2.5 years, although we do receive the hardware. And then new in-car cameras, I'm not sure if I mentioned that. In the 5th year, we get a full new set of in-car cameras, actual hardware included. But again, just as you mentioned, it is under that lease program.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And then you had mentioned something, and I'm not sure I understood it. You said commissioners would be able to get the video from the body cameras at any time, or?
If we release it to you. And I don't mean to be facetious about that, but this is, I just run a scenario.
Well, I would actually prefer that you didn't.
Well, and this is.
Without, you know, going through the
And
proper.
I'll expand on that
Same
as
as
well.
any other resident in the
Exactly.
township. I mean, I'm not sure why that would be something afforded to the Board of Commissioners.
And there are channels to go through that, but if we are going to release a video, we would certainly be able to release it to you as well as the public. If we needed to put something out, whether, and it doesn't even have to be a critical incident. It could be anything as far as something good, something that we wanted to release on social media involving the police department and children that we always have. But there are protocols that are in place to do that. And we're bound by law on certain things that we can and can't release. I'm sure everybody's aware of that as well. And like I said, the right to know law doesn't regulate this. There's another portion of the law that does regulate how that's released. But I just use that as an example of how quickly that data is available if we needed it, and that you could or would be able to view it as once the chief decides that would be released, and the manager, we can make that available relatively quickly. One other aspect to that is the law enforcement sharing aspect. We're bound by the district attorney's office to do certain things with our videos right now. As such, any crimes that are involved that we have record of, we have to maintain that video recording as well, and when required, certainly share certain videos with them. When investigations come up, because there are other law enforcement agencies, they would be able, under the law, to access this almost immediately, depending on what their level of involvement is. So, and again, I just use that as an example, maybe I'm.
I got it. I mean, I would just be concerned.
Sure.
We have
No,
security
absolutely.
cameras around the building. I'd be concerned about commissioners having access to those at any
Certainly.
time also.
Certainly.
I mean, there are certain things that, we may be the elected body, but there are certain procedures and fail-safes
Absolutely.
that, would prevent the elected officials from just having reign of the township.
Sure.
For any reason, so.
Oh, and I agree, I agree.
And then I was confused about the DEA funding. Why would that even be connected? I mean, so infrequently we see funding, and I know Chief Malloy had shared the information that I know he's going to share it to the rest of the commissioners about the potential funding coming forward, but we could be another few years, and that was the sign-on to the DEA funding. I'm not sure why you would even connect that to this program, because if you have another 5 years of Sergeant Toledo, correct? If there was another 5 or 6 years of him not being involved or not getting any seizure money, I mean, that's where those funds are going to go. I don't know why we would even make a connection to the body cameras. Plus, that's an operating expense and this is a capital expense.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I just know that that money gets tagged for police-specific use only.
Understood.
And I'm not sure how that gets, but maybe I spoke pretty quickly through that portion.
Okay.
It has been expressed, and there's been some concerns expressed to us that the, how are we doing our due diligence to search for additional funding? And certainly we look at this DEA program, and I'm only mentioning it because we've recently received written correspondence, which is much more than we received in the past at times, saying that, yes, this money is in the pipeline and comes, and it's just an indication that if that does come, we would certainly be willing to apply it to this, as long as we go through the proper channels, obviously, and speaking with Mr. Barron. But we wanted to make sure that you understood our due diligence and taking a look at alternative funding sources. We're looking at the grants constantly. And if this, and again, I said at the end of that, I said, we don't count our chickens before they hatch, and that's certainly not. But I did want to make you aware of that is a possibility that comes in. And if it does, we are obviously looking at it as we would, as you would expect us to be fiscally responsible, to apply it to a program such as this. That's simply all we meant by that.
And I'll finish up. My last question is about traffic safety. Are the traffic safety officers on board with getting these speed signs? I mean, do they think they're effective? Because to be quite frank, I've been in a few townships that have had it, and they're just pure white noise.
So that's the importance of having mobile speed signs, quite frankly. You go through some townships, and I'm sure you've been through some in our surrounding area, that there's an affixed sign to a pole that's been there for 5, 10 years. Pretty soon sometimes it becomes a game to the public. And we're aware of that. So that's why we would like to get other speed carts so that we can move them around. And quite frankly, typically, and I know some of the commissioners that I've been involved with in recent meetings are aware of this, we'll put those speed carts out there to monitor the speed for a while, and then we go out and do heavy enforcement. And then we can say to the district justice, not only did we have the speed carts out there, not only did we do public service announcements on our website or on our social media and do these campaigns about reducing speed, then we did our speed enforcement. Not only did it I think that's more than fair to the public, and that's typically a tactic that we do, but also and just to have mere presence and awareness in different areas of the township so it doesn't become that white noise. And that's why we're concerned about being able to have the ability to have mobile speed announcing signs or awareness signs for the public.
Then why are we buying the speed signs?
To move them around, to
No,
address
that's the speed carts.
No, the signs do the same, I'm sorry. The
Yeah,
signs,
but you mentioned that they're difficult to move around.
they are, it's not like I pick them up today and move them. They just get unplugged, unwired, unmounted from the pole, and then we can move them somewhere else. They wouldn't be a permanent fixture. And that's one of the things that I made sure talking to the traffic safety manager, Officer Freed, is that we do, whatever we purchase, that we have the ability to move them. Now, they may be in an area instead of for 3 days, they may be there for 3 weeks, and then we move it. That's all dependent upon the conditions or what we were trying to accomplish in that area.
So are they the same or slightly more difficult to move around than the speed carts?
Probably slightly more difficult because you just don't pull up to them and hook a hitch up. You unplug it, unwire it with the the highway lighting system guys at our township yard, they assist us with that. But it is important to us that we be able to move them around so we can address different areas of the township. And one other feature to them that I should have mentioned that I didn't want to get too far in the weeds with is that we can put those in areas that we cannot get our speed carts in currently safely. We can just do that, and we can mount them in
Right,
different positions.
I mean, I know in my ward, the speed carts always take up too much space, and cars are always swerving into the other lane.
Yes.
I guess, I wouldn't understand why we would go ahead and get more speed carts when we can probably get 2 speed signs for the same price as 1 speed cart. Even if they are slightly more difficult to move around, I just,
There's
why-
different features available on speed carts if we go with new ones that'll give us tracking information, message information that we can do as well. And essentially, it's doing a traffic survey and things like that. So there's other things that speed cart will do that the sign won't. So just some different features, certainly, and it's all choice point when we move forward.
Okay, we have questions from Commissioner Schreiber and Commissioner Brodsky.
I actually just have a comment. So the letter that we're talking about from the DEAs, I was the one who asked the chief about grants or other ways to pay for this particular program. I think that the body cams and the car cams are a really important program. So I was asking about the funding because I wanted to see how that would happen. And so I asked about grants coming through, and then also this was a slightly, correct me if I'm wrong, unusual DEA situation where we think we're going to get more than the usual funding, is that correct? And that it could be used directly for this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Again, we're looking at an opioid crisis in the region. I know that Commissioner Klein, we spoke about Sergeant Toledo. He has not been with the DEA. He left about 5 years ago. And but there's still cases. He had to go to federal court like 3 weeks ago. So because of due process and money that's in the pipeline, as you are aware, we're still waiting for some residual funds from his investigation. He was a rock star down there, spoke Spanish. He was one of the leading investigators and handled some really big jobs. Right now, we have a detective who's down there, and in recent weeks, he was involved in 2018 with Dr. Cassis, a psychiatrist from Norristown, $4.5 million seizures, 2.5 in cash and assets, $2 million in real estate, and more. And back in 2016, Dr. Padnes, also a psychiatrist from Glenside, that's about $7 million total that they're looking at seizing from him, and it's a 20%. But I understand the frustration. This goes back to Chief Kelly, Chief Livingood, and I had Manager Manfredi and I spoke about this. I had been down. Go ahead, Manager.
Yeah. All I want to say is this. I think there's been concern over the years, and you can see in the budget how many years they've been looking for this money. But in terms of level of confidence that we'll actually get this money sooner than later, without getting into what tactical maneuvers Chief Malloy has used, I believe the things that he has done to ensure that we get that money more quickly was frankly artful. So I feel our confidence levels should be up that we get that money sooner.
Thank you, Manager. And part of that was expressing the frustration with the commissioners and the management when I was speaking to officials, number 1, 2, and 3 down at the DEA, because we need those resources.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, we've been sold a bill of goods about the DEA officer, and I know they're doing good work, but the funding is coming right out of the township taxpayers, and oftentimes they're not doing work in the township. And Chief Kelly sold it as we would be getting money to offset this, and it's been very scarce to see any money, and somewhat disappointing that we were promised, or not promised, but expected to see some kind of offset and never came to fruition, or hasn't yet. So it'd be great if you can figure out a way that we would get our fair share.
I agree with you, Commissioner, and it's frustrating. They did change some of the rules after we had been there with regard to seizures and the asset sharing, and it looks like it's coming back in our favor now.
Okay. Commissioner Brodsky, you had a question, and then Commissioner Sanchez.
So I know I said I wasn't going to ask any questions, but one came to mind.
Yes, sir.
The body cameras, what's the reliability of the equipment? Or another way of asking the question of, has a prosecution been lost specifically because of equipment failure, or because something went wrong with the equipment? This is a big investment in equipment, and has any prosecutions either in the Commonwealth or if you're in other jurisdictions been lost because of equipment failure?
Yeah, let me just comment briefly before I maybe rely on our Axon representatives back there. What I will say is our testing of the cameras from 3.5 years ago till today, by far we found this piece of hardware, this item, to be the most reliable that we had, both in recording, both in consistency, and we experienced 0 issues, and Lieutenant McGee headed up that project for us. We experienced 0 issues with Axon's product. I can't say the same for everybody else. But as far as reliability, I don't know, 17,000 police departments across the country. Do one of you individuals want to comment on that? Sure. This is Sal. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his last name. He is the senior sales...
Director of Sales Engineering.
Director, yeah, that. But he can answer, he can address that for you.
Sure.
Sal?
Good evening. So when it comes down to our equipment, we understand that there's going to be challenges. It is an electronic device. It is creating content, and it is going to be challenged in court. We have not lost any cases related to video footage recorded on our body cameras due to the fact that they are recorded, hashed with a SHA-2 fingerprint that allows them to be copied and transmitted across the two stakeholders, making sure that they're, in fact, intact. And then, more importantly, the drop frame rate. We do not drop frames whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. Those factors alone are typically what we'll call the water leaks in other body-worn camera providers. We do not have those issues whatsoever. So we do not lose cases based on that.
That's an authenticity and chain of custody issue. My question is more directed towards, have you lost a prosecution because of the equipment?
I'm not aware of any of that, no.
In any jurisdiction? Are you across the country?
I am the director of North America, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. Excuse me, Lieutenant Porter, that was a great presentation. Back to the speeding. There were things that they hung on the poles in the last couple years ago that detected how fast everybody was going and printed out a report. Do
Yes.
we still have them?
We have something similar to that. It's not on the poles, it's a box on the ground now. We are limited, that limits exactly what we can do as far as checking cars, as far as the roadways that are traveled, the lanes that are traveled, and actually the locations that we can put them. That's specifically one of the requests for the radar. We'd have more than one radar gun then moving forward, that we could put an officer out there impromptu in certain locations that we could document and record that information real time and in an inconspicuous manner, if you will.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez and then Commissioner Rothman.
A mundane point back to about 20 minutes ago on the classification between operations and capital asset for this. I mean, can we just check with the auditors and see how they would recommend treatment of that for our independent auditors?
We actually have it from our independent auditors. I supplied it to Commissioner Klein. I'll send it to everyone else.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Rothman.
I'm not sure if this is a statement that requires some follow-up from you guys, or if it's just me expressing my opinion, so let's see where it goes. I'll try to keep it short. The mobile devices, the signs, the carts, are something where sometime pretty early this year, I spent some time with Chief Malloy and Lieutenant Warner and Chief Warner, basically, I said to them, hey, listen, the biggest complaint that we as commissioners hear is relating to traffic safety. And we work within the parameters, they work within the parameters set forth by PennDOT, which are not, they're not ideal. And I'm sure there's reasons for them, but we are limited in what we can do. So I said, let's throw everything against the wall and see what we can do. The technology is available, but it's expensive. Ideally, Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we sort of agreed that we would like to have even more than what we're trying to budget for right now, because we don't want to just throw the money in a pit and maybe find out that it doesn't work. But you expressed to me that you had been to conferences and discussed this, that it was something that was going on. I fully understand the concern that other commissioners may have and that the public may have as to if these mobile carts are effective or not. But at the same time, and I certainly share those questions. I trust Chief, and we had a frank conversation about it, and we have to do something. We have way too much speeding in the township, and I'm sure it's the same thing everywhere, but Abington, the way the roads are set up here, it's a cut-through area. Every single ward has so many cut-through streets that it's, you know, we can come up with lists and lists and lists. And I really think that it's worth trying. Now, maybe we don't get 10 of the carts that, you know, we had discussed as, which could be ideal, and we start out with 2 or a few more. But I certainly think my take is we owe it to our residents to explore this, see if there's anything we can do, monitor closely, and absolutely follow up with putting someone, you know, an officer to do more legwork when the sign is moved away so that we can see if there's an impact, get some people caught. I mean, we had people in my neighborhood a few weeks ago. I watched someone get pulled over. And it was sort of like one of these strategic approaches that came out of that meeting we had. So while I understand that we all may be or should be a little skeptical, I'm strongly in favor of us voting to include the purchase of additional items of this nature, and my hope is that it's not a waste of money. But like anything else that we don't know for sure, you know, you can't get that answer until you look. So, and anybody who wants to talk offline about it too, certainly I'm willing to, but if there's anything else to fill in there, if I misrepresented anything, please share that with the group.
Commissioner, I agree 100% with your assessment. We feel frustrated sometimes when we have over 300 locations. We have 2 of the hardest working traffic safety officers, I believe, in the county. That is our #1 complaint. You guys have identified it. The commissioners have identified that as one of your priorities. I think it's a visible sign that we're trying to do something, but when you only have 2 cumbersome carts to move around, and like Commissioner Klein said, it's difficult to get them out in many locations, but if you have these smaller portable ones, which are expensive, and we're working to try to get more, it would give us, we would be able to share the resources with more of the commissioners based on geography and the number of complaints that come in. Some of the features there that are interesting, you could have that on a pole, then you turn it on for 24, 48 hours, and you can do measurements of speed, and then you can have it low profile off and see if there is a difference in speed when it's being recorded. I know I slow down when I see those things. I see them, unfortunately, in other jurisdictions more than Abington. We only had 2 that are 15 years old. Thankfully, we were able to get those things repaired, and our vehicle maintenance helped us with batteries, and we were able to get them out onto the east side, I believe. But I do believe that if we have more of those available, we also talked about ghost cars and other things that we could put out there to at least slow traffic down. I think that they are effective if we use them properly, where they don't become white noise. You put them out there and you leave them out there for an extended period of time. They become part of the landscape.
I mean, if I could just follow up, that we can't do nothing. And right now, it's not that the police are doing nothing, but we can't just sit and do what we have. You know, there's too much information out there, there's too much technology for us not to go get it and do something. So whether it's this or something else, I'm certainly open to ideas, but this is something that we've identified, and I you know, again, strongly support going down the route that you've discussed and proposed in this budget. And I thank you for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may, Commissioner Luker, I just want to dial back and roll back. After the priority was established, I went to Traffic Safety Manager Officer Freed and said, this is a priority on traffic safety. This is what the commissioners are looking at. Take your best case scenario as what we can do and what we can put in play that's reasonable, and make it as a recommendation. That was what was submitted in that 133,000. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, and you gentlemen can tell me if I'm incorrect, but that was the Traffic Safety Division leaders' recommendations on what we should do. Now, there were things that were in there that we believe we can take care of in other ways, which is why it was reduced. But just so Commissioner Rothman knows that these are the recommendations of traffic safety, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. The manager, quite frankly, asked us to look for efficiencies in other areas and see what we can do to make the most of what we have to work with, and that's how we came to the number that's on the budget today.
And just simple math, we have 15 elected officials, and we like to proportionately support each of you with your complaints and your priorities. Honestly, I mean, that's a reality. I work with chiefs and meet with chiefs that have 5 commissioners and 8 commissioners. But if we were to have, like Commissioner Rothman and I spoke about, if we were to have at least 1 per 2 commissioners, or one or 2 per quadrants, how we divide up our township with quality of life issues. This is a quality of life issue. This is something that I think the manager and traffic safety officer Freed, we agree, it's something we can do that's visible and be responsive to these high, what we call hot spots as far as traffic safety goes. So.
Any other questions? Commissioner Myers.
Actually, not a question, but I just want everyone, and people, residents that are watching this, to be clear. Besides your presentation, every other presentation.
Commissioner Myers, could you check your mic, see if it's on?
Thank you, thank you. Every other presentation that we had tonight was in that, an increase, tax increase for next year. To be very clear, no part of this is part of the tax increase, correct?
That is correct.
I am so in favor of body cameras that I think it's essential. I like the idea of if a commissioner, if it meets the criteria and a commissioner can get the footage, I can see a resident calling one of us and saying I was mistreated by an officer. I was stopped and mistreated by an officer, and to be able to say, we'll check the video on that for you. I think that's really important. And the way that the world is changing and that everyone has a video camera in their hand, it's essential that our police officers have a video camera on their chest.
Thank you, and your comments are echoed with our own police officers, believe it or not. You know, that they look forward to having quality equipment that'll function and work and help us be transparent and really show the citizens of Abington Township the good work that's being done out there. So thank you.
And I appreciate that, Lieutenant, but I have to be honest, I spoke to all of our officers, at least half of our department this week in department-wide training, and it's been a long time since I put handcuffs on anybody or locked anybody up, and I'm not so sure I would want a camera on me 24/7. I can understand some of the, you know, the anxiety. I don't know, as attorneys or doctors or other professions that have, you know, that make mistakes, right, during their daily activities, whether they would want that attached to them. But I will tell you, if you look at President Obama's 21st century policing and some of the recommendations that were made for increasing the trust and transparency. In fact, when we looked at that after the study, we were very happy to report that Abington Police Department was doing almost every single one of those. Where we did fall short is with the technology and social media. The technology, although they didn't say that they recommend cameras for every police department, back in 2015, 1 out of every 3 police departments in the United States had body-worn cameras. And what are the benefits of that? Among other potential benefits, proponents believe that police body cameras will deter problem conduct in citizen police contacts on both the part of the police officer and the citizen who is being audio and videotaped. I mean, it's a deterrent there. And it also provided evidence that citizens police encounters that will foster transparency and accountability, all things that we favor. You know, we want to open up our books, open up the doors, and what you said, Commissioner, is true. Oftentimes, when we first had in-car cameras, you know, the police officers were big brother. We don't want this, you know, to be followed, but man, within 48 hours, 72 hours, they loved it, and that's what's going on now. And Commissioner Ramsey talks about Philadelphia, where the 24th District, they tried this with 12 officers, and it was as a pilot program, and they were lining up saying they wanted these cameras. So I think it's a good thing for both sides, you know, for the citizens and for the police.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, sir.
I would surely hope that there are rules and procedures if the body cameras go into effect, that commissioners don't and elected officials don't have unbridled access to that video. If a resident were to call me and ask me for body cameras, I would hope I could tell them to call the police department, and you guys would have a form or a procedure that they would need to go through instead of it going through the commissioner to the resident.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely correct. There is, and again, we just meant to use that as an example of how expedient the service is and how available the information is to us. It's primarily more available to other law enforcement agencies, the district attorney's office, quite frankly, during their investigations as well. But there is a process. It's not so much as if you call me or the chief that we can say, okay, and give you access immediately to any type of video. And again, I apologize for misspeaking or perhaps misrepresenting that initially. It was just merely meant as an example to show you how efficient this system is compared to what's out there now, certainly compared to what we've been using in comparison to other cameras, but certainly as to what we've been using for the last eight and a half years. So your point's well noted, and we do understand that.
Commissioner, thanks for asking that question. When he said that, he really meant Mr. Klein, not Commissioner Klein, or any member of the public. You could get that, not to, give you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Porter, Lieutenant McGee, and Chief of Police Pat Malloy. Thank you, gentlemen.
When do we get to find out how to pronounce Sal's last name? I've been waiting for 20 minutes.
DeMauro.
All right,
We'll give you a business card at the end.
At this time, excuse me, sir. At this time, we'll open the floor to questions from the public.
So is this questions for the public or comments for the public, or?
Comments?
This is one deal and done for the public, or what is the situation?
No, I'm going to, I'll preface your statements by saying, if you have any questions, it might be better served if you email them to the township manager's office, and he can answer them if you have any questions. But it was imperative that the commissioners question the department heads on the budget process, and I think they did their due diligence and vetted every portion of the budget very admirably up until this time. So at this time, I'm opening up to the public
Okay, so I assume the answer was for comments then?
for comments, yes.
Okay, I mean, I didn't know
And
if
you
you
know-
were
you
having
know the
comments
routine.
after questions.
You know
Okay.
the routine. Go ahead.
Okay, so, well.
Name and address,
3
please.
minutes would certainly not do for that many presentations.
I didn't say
and
3 minutes.
and
I just asked for
okay,
your name and
thank you,
address.
okay.
Name and address, please.
Laura Lehman, 1431 Bryant Lane.
Go ahead.
So the first thing I'd like to say is that at any meeting like this that would go this late, it's 10:07. So, we have a 3-hour meeting, and somebody who comes and wants to make a small comment from the public should be able to do that first at every meeting, and particularly at one that is going to be this lengthy. And removing the opportunity to leave, to speak to you and then to be able to leave is difficult for people with families and so on. So also, it is not in the interest of the public to make policies that the public cannot question along with while the presentation is going. As you know, it would be difficult for the public to keep that. I write copious notes, but the public isn't normally used to doing that. So it would be very difficult for them to be able to follow that many presentations and keep their thoughts on those things in mind. So the other thing is, when did the commissioners get the link to the budget? How long ago?
What does that have to
How
do
long ago
with-
was the link available, is my question.
Well,
It's very relevant to the budget process, so it's very relevant. If we need to hire another person to get the link on time, we might have to do that. So I'm curious as to know when you had the link available. It wasn't on the website today. I got the budget hours before this meeting. Did you have it days before, or when did you have the link?
Mr. Manager wanted to answer that question. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Luker, the commissioners had their books last Friday, and I believe it was on the website in several places on Monday.
Okay, so it was not under the finance department where several of us looked. Okay.
It was put on there Monday afternoon, and I made sure it was.
And it's on the homepage, under the news section. It's been static there since Monday.
Okay, well.
And on social media.
All right, so Apparently I missed it, so.
Keep in mind, this is a preliminary budget, so there's going to be more meetings held. But go ahead. And there's no action being taken, correct?
And
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Klein, who has removed me from his list and doesn't think I need to know this information.
back to the
And apparently
subject.
also did not email his
Ms.
other
Lehman, could you
constituents
stay
with the link.
focused on your comments?
Those are important comments.
I know.
If you have a resident who is not getting information from their commissioner that's important information, that's an important comment for you to
Continue,
know.
please.
And,
Thank you.
and for you to deal with it, to find out what's going on and to solve that problem.
I don't want a personal debate going on. Could you
That's
just
not a
keep,
personal debate. I'm asking
moving,
you
Ms. Lehman.
to find out what's happening in that department and to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's not a personal debate. That's me
you're looking
asking
you're looking over here, so just keep going.
my legislator to make rules and regulations that work for the residents that he serves. That's what I'm asking. So my understanding is, and because I literally had a blitz to look at the budget, I haven't even had a chance to look at it in any thorough manner at all. But are we raising taxes 5.7%, or is the budget, the actual budget 5.7% more than it was last year? Is that correct?
Kev,
The budget is going up that percentage. The tax increase is not that percentage.
Okay, so what is the tax percentage?
It was shown to you on one of the slides, a $20,
I
a
might have
$30
missed
fire
that.
tax
That's why
and a
I'm asking.
$6 ambulance tax.
I'm sorry?
It was $30 to the fire departments and $6 to the ambulance, a
And what-
$36 tax.
And what percent increase is that, is what
I
I'm
don't have that
asking.
on the top of my head.
Okay, but your operating budget is a 5.7% increase?
Ms. Lehman, I think I
think
specified
that's-
in the beginning, it might be easier for you to field your questions via email to the department.
Well,
the
that's
manager.
I think that's an important thing for you to have presented here, that your operating budget is 5.7% increase.
4.72.
The average person making an income that pays the taxes that pay that budget is not getting a 5.7% increase in their checks. So these are important things for you to know and to understand. If you have people that might get a 1% or 2% raise, and maybe their medical insurance went up twice that, okay, and now you have a 5.6 or 7% increase in your operating budget, that affects all of them. And that information should have been part of this meeting. And I don't believe it was, but I do miss some things, and I maybe don't do my math quite as fast as Mr. Barron. So I thank him for finding that figure while I'm talking. The OPEB and the capital expenses, which get the overview of from the end of the year, we have been over every year, right? We've had money to put into the OPEB and the capital expenses every year at the end of the year. So we're actually raising revenues from the residents who are already having too much collected because we have excess at the end of the year that we're putting into the OPEB and the capital. My concern, as I've expressed in prior years, is that you don't have a specific plan to fill that OPEB hole. Whatever amount excess there is, you just throw that in the hole and then raise taxes and put some more of that excess in the hole. That's not the right way to manage this. The residents have a right to know exactly what the plan is, how the OPEB should be paid, and what amount. It should be a budget item to put into the OPEB. It shouldn't be whatever you have left over. And you shouldn't be raising taxes when you have stuff left over. You're overtaxing people and then overtaxing them as much as you want. You're also, I want to mention, when you gifted the $100,000 to Salem Baptist, if you're now raising money and taxing, this is what you need to understand.
No, I don't-
You are
no,
actually
you need to
taxing
understand,
people
you've been up-
to pay Salem Baptist.
You're getting way off the budget process. You've been up here for 6 minutes now.
If you don't have the money for
Okay.
police items that you need, for stormwater items that you need, for other items that you need, and you have to raise taxes, and you gifted some money away, you basically gave away something
do you
that
have
caused
anything
you to
else?
raise taxes.
Do you have anything constructive to continue with?
That's very
Because you've been
constructive.
up here for 7 minutes now.
So,
I gave you
all
more
right,
than
so I
3.
want you to understand that that is.
I want you to
okay.
understand your time
So I'd
is
like
up
to know
now.
what happened to the uncollected taxes. I will put that in an email. Did you come up with a figure?
If you would
Mr.
do that,
Brown?
please.
No?
What uncollected taxes?
So I think 98% of the taxes were collected. The other 2%?
Correct. If you look at the revenue line items called delinquent taxes every year I budget about $150,000 to $160,000 for delinquent taxes. That goes to the county every week, and we get a wire from the county, and people pay their delinquent taxes. I have a list of the delinquent taxes of all the years back to 2004, I think 2005, I don't know, the latest year. But there's money out there, and it is collected, and most of the years are 99.9% collected.
Okay,
After
I
a
thought the
certain year.
figure in this one said 98%.
That's every current year. But then a resident has years to pay the delinquent taxes before their house is sold on an upset sale or tax lien sale. So they do pay it. We get about $150,000 to $170,000 a year in delinquent taxes.
That explains where some of it's coming from.
And
So
I've
I'll
answered that.
verify that with
I have
you.
answered that before.
Okay, Ms. Lehman?
Okay, yes.
Ms. Lehman, I'm going to stop you right here. We're going to end the meeting at this time. Any other
No,
questions that you
let-
have?
ma-
No, Ms.
please,
Lehman,
there
we're
were
not going to be here
several
all night answering all your
presentations.
personal questions. You've been up here for 8 minutes now. 8 minutes.
Had I been able to ask questions as the
Now,
commissioners were,
I
I
said at
wouldn't
the
have
beginning of the
had a
meeting, when you
problem
weren't
with
here,
that.
if you have any questions, you can direct them to the manager's office.
Okay.
So at that, I'm going to, if there's any other comments from the public, I'll ask for a meeting to adjourn. Any other comments from commissioners? If not, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Amazing.
I guess they turn them off.
It's off, I guess.
Good job there.
Good job there.